All right, we are live. This is Sound Booth Theater Live. These are the cold reads for Stain. Everybody Loves Large Chests, Volume 8. This is part 3 of those cold reads. I'm about 14% into the book. We're starting on part 5 today. So thank you everybody who's already here to watch. Sorry I'm a little bit late. Just doing some posting about a new release we had today, Mega Mech Apocalypse Episode 3 Crossverse. For those of you who don't know, we've started a basically a short story serial called Mega Mech Apocalypse, and it's in partnership with Athon Books. The authors are C.J. Valen and Jamie Castle. They started this series called Raptors, and there's like 3 full audiobooks on Audible for this already. Yeah, it's a superhero series, and we're doing a little short story serial with them for free on our platform. So if you want to go check it out, you can. There's already 3 episodes available. I did episode 1. Lori Catherine Winkle narrated episode 2. Dory Sachs narrated episode 3, and all of them feature me as backup voice. So, Joseph Dubs, good to see you. Flipster, Tristan, love seeing you guys in the audience, as always. Thanks for coming. Yeah, and I guess let's just go ahead and get started. I am really excited to get back to the Everybody Loves Large Chests. You know, I said this before, but I'm still feeling it. Like we've gone past volume 7 now. We're at 8. All that's left is 9, 10, 11, 12, I believe. I think volume 9 is actually going to get published pretty soon on Kindle. But I'm just bummed, man. I don't want it to end. I don't want this series to end. I feel like I felt the same way about the feedback loop, when Harmon was done with that. Even though I had taken such a long hiatus from that one because it just wasn't pulling in listeners, I still loved it. And I'm hoping that maybe one day Harmon wants to do like a new series out of Quantum, but I just, I get attached to these characters. I get attached to these stories, especially when I feel like they fit my personality quite a bit. Everybody Loves Large Chests. Definitely awakens that imp in me. I think not very many people have a Boxxy inside them, but I for sure do. Uh, just absolute evil mayhem is something I really enjoy. Plus it's hilarious, and I love playing these characters. So anyway, I have my Ableton pulled up. I will go ahead and share my screen here so that you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm taking notes so that the Ahmed can apply sound effects to the book. These notes are in the form of MIDI tracks, MIDI clips within the set, and there's no MIDI data within the clips. It's just convenient to be able to place them and label them. So yeah, I'll be doing that, and you guys can see that process while I'm narrating. And so far, it hasn't been super action packed. So not a whole lot to do with the sound effects, which is fine by me. Like that the less work that Ahmed has to do per finished hour, the better, because I don't have to pay as much. Number one. Number two, it gets the production process goes faster. But this series always has those great action set pieces. So they may not be here yet, but they will be. Don't worry. I have gone as the Crow for Halloween back when I was like in middle school, I think. Man, middle school. How long ago was that? fucking 25 years ago. Jesus. 23 years ago. Wow. Thanks, Rob. Rob says, I love the work you guys do. You have quickly become the audiobooks I look forward to the most. I appreciate that. By the way, guys, just so you know, cold reads are a thing that we do publish on our platform. Last week we published the Monster Hunt NYC 3 cold reads. Those are now available for free on our platform, so you can go pick those up if you want to. I did the same thing here. I showed what I was doing as far as the notes. So anyone who's psyched for that series, go check that out. These will be published on our platform next Tuesday, but they'll be available on YouTube until the thing is published, so you can watch or listen on our platform either way. Yeah, don't forget our platform, guys. The new app is launching very soon. I can't wait for you guys to see that and experience it and fondle it on your phones. It's going to be a good time. All right, here goes. Whoops, I keep forgetting to change that format. Beep, that's better. Part 5. A place of darkness. A place of darkness and despair. Oh, that's not a subtitle. That's the beginning of the narration. Actually, guys, I'm doing something dangerous right now. I forgot to put on my narration socks before I started narrating. I don't recommend anyone ever do that. Very high chance of being electrocuted without the proper socks on while you narrate. So, be right back. It's a close one, guys. It was a close one. Almost. I could have narrated an entire chapter without narration socks, and it's putting myself at risk. I got the yellow ones today for energy, extra energy. I know this is going to be a bit more of a action-packed chapter, so figured might as well pull out the big guns, right? Oh, let me get some more coffee. Dangerous business, narration. Gotta have the right gear. And despair. That was the most succinct way to describe Anor Keep. It was a gloomy place, flanked on all sides by depressing swamplands. Its walls, towers, and buildings were hewn out of cold, black stone, and grotesque creatures patrolled the skies above. To say this keep had a gloomy atmosphere was an understatement, though it was to be expected. It was, after all, one of the major holdings of the Order of the Black Wand, and the organization had an image to uphold. Even if it was one of creepiness and foreboding, it was still, for lack of a better word, their brand. However, The current oppressive atmosphere was much heavier than usual, as every necromancer under the guild's employ had been called here. The air stank profusely of rot, as each had brought their own entourage of the dead. They had ordered their creations to bury themselves in the ground to not take up space, but it was inevitable some would be left roaming around. There were also living and breathing guards, of course. There were also living and breathing guards, of course, but they couldn't be trusted to maintain a vigilant watch with sleet pouring down from... There were also living and breathing guards, of course, but they couldn't be trusted to maintain a vigilant watch with sleet pouring down from the skies, especially when it was the dead of night, hours before the morning twilight even considered showing itself. Hence, undead sentries were needed, as these creatures were bothered by neither darkness nor cold. Admittedly, they were rather brainless, but they could still ceaselessly patrol the perimeter and scream their heads off at anyone approaching the base. Determining whether this trespasser was an intruder, a passerby, or another member of the guild would then be left up to the living. Determining whether this trespasser was an intruder, a passerby, or another member of the guild would then be left up to the living. The monsters circling above were a different story, for they were very much alive. There were about a dozen beholders, all of whom were made to stand watch for any disturbances, magical or otherwise. Demons were tireless, required no food or drink, and thought of... Demons were tireless, required no food or drink, and thought for themselves, so they made ideal lookouts, provided that their summoners had issued the right instructions, of course. These literal eyes in the sky were not the only things flying around. There were also 9 gargoyles, winged humanoid monsters with smooth charcoal... Winged... There were also 9 gargoyles, winged humanoid monsters with smooth charcoal black hides covering their slender bodies. Their hands and feet were tipped with sharp claws, their faces and ears shaped like a bat's, and their snouts full of sharp teeth. These required significantly more upkeep than the demons or undead at the site, but with good reason. Gargoyles were fast, vicious, and nimble, able to evade almost anything thrown at them long enough to move in and tear into their targets. Though they lost some of their natural ferocity after being wrangled by a monster tamer, the job's other skills more than made up for that. Though they lost some of their natural ferocity after being wrangled by a monster tamer, the job's other skills more than made up for it. Anor Keep's current state was caused by a number of reasons that could be summed up in 3 words: Guildmaster's orders. The Order of the Black Wand had officially recognized the threat of the serial killer targeting their necromancer members across the Empire. In fact, given the sheer speed at which those people were being eliminated, it seemed unlikely that it was the work of a single individual. The Guild had no choice but to recognize it as an organized attack on their ranks, which required an adequate response. An emergency message was sent out to all potential victims, urging them to head to Anor Keep. An emergency message was sent out to all potential victims, urging them to head to Anor Keep, where the Order of the Black Wand would offer protection and shelter. It was a temporary arrangement that would only last until the ones responsible for killing their members were found and brought to justice. That was also why the Guildmaster had supposedly disappeared, as he had launched his own personal investigation by going off to consult his less reputable associates. This news reassured many of the necromancers, as it showed Cromwell was taking their plight seriously. There were, of course, quite a few cynics who assumed the old donkey had gone into hiding to save his own skin. Regardless of their personal feelings on the guildmaster's absence, over 100 corpse-talkers had answered Cromwell's summons from 10 days ago. As ordered, they had converged at Anor Keep as soon as possible through whatever means they had available. Some took advantage of their guildmates' teleportation magics, while others arrived via fantastical creatures like griffins or skeletal steeds. There was even one necromancer who suffered some nasty burns after taking a chance on an artificer's previously untested automobile prototype. That was just how urgent this gathering was. I need to check something real quick. Sorry, guys. Oops, there's somebody else I forgot to cast. Actually, let me find these people.
Master! I got Reggie.
That's Drea. Remy. Remy what? Remy Cromwell. And then Annie had another character here. Grace. All right. Back at it. That was just how urgent this gathering was. Or rather, that was just how desperate these people were. Though necromancers weren't outlawed, their existence was almost universally distrusted and reviled. Common folk saw them as a necessary evil. What's up, Neven? Good to see you here in the stream, man. Neven says, Jeff, I think you might not be aware, but there's an oily mop on your head. You might want to look into that. It's water, dude, okay? All right? It's clean. It's clean. Common folk saw them as a necessary evil. Common folk saw them as a necessary evil at best, or heretics to be strung up by their necks at worst. Yet many continued to walk the path, as it was an easy way of quickly amassing power with the potential of achieving immortality through lichdom. It was a job favored by cowards and outcasts, people who were almost always on edge anyway. Having such a direct threat looming over them made them even more paranoid than usual. Ugh. Having Having such a direct threat looming over them made them even more paranoid than usual. Though they gathered at the keep for safety, being around a bunch of other nervous wrecks was not exactly relaxing. Furthermore, they were barred from leaving Anor Keep's grounds for their own protection, which led to quite a few necromancers feeling like they were being imprisoned. Despite all those misgivings, this still seemed the best course of action. The guild had provided comfortable lodgings and ample provisions, so the stay wasn't all that unpleasant. After the first few days of arriving and settling in, people started swapping ideas and knowledge, raising their overall understanding of their dark arts. Educational benefits aside, it was nice to socialize with like-minded individuals without fear of pitchforks and torches. There was a significant portion of necromancers that planned to make NecroCon a regular event once this serial killer business was resolved. It was questionable whether any of them would actually step up and organize the event, but the thought alone helped keep the powder keg of nerves from exploding. Indeed, though its occupants were coping as best they could, Anor Keep remained largely gripped by unease and uncertainty. Arguments and disagreements were over increasingly petty matters cropped up with greater frequency as the days rolled by. The tension wasn't helped by the lack of news regarding the mystery assassin or the guildmaster's movements. Both were understandable, of course. It wouldn't be much of an investigation if Cromwell leaked what he knew before he could act on it, and the killer wouldn't dare make a move on such a heavily fortified location. Or would he? Perhaps this vigilante saw this gathering as an opportunity to take them all out in one fell swoop. That worrisome thought was frequently thrown around by some, though others were quick to reassure that wouldn't happen. Between the necromancers, their undead minions, and the various adventurers and mercenaries serving as guards, Anor Keep was presently home to a small army. Anyone brazen enough to attack would be put down in moments. Assuming, of course, those hirelings did their job of patrolling the perimeter. Unsurprisingly, there were many who refused to babysit over 100 taboo holders no matter the coin on offer. Unsurprisingly, there were many who refused to babysit over 100 taboo holders no matter the coin on offer. Unsurprisingly, there were many who refused to babysit over 100 taboo holders no matter the coin on offer. It wasn't just the principle. It took a certain level of scumbaggery and poor morals for someone to be able to ignore the disgusting sensations emitted by that stigma of a skill. In other words, all these high-strung necromancers were seeking shelter from an unknown assailant while guarded by a bunch of borderline bandits. The level of distrust between potential victims and would-be protectors was astronomical. Even though a fair chunk of the adventurers and mercenaries were technically part of the Order, none gave a shit about any of the lives in their charge beyond earning a paycheck. It wasn't hard to imagine one or more of these people might sell the corpse talkers out of... Corpse talkers. It wasn't hard to imagine one or more of these people might sell the corpse talkers out for the right price. Or worse, the killer could very well be among them. Frankly speaking, it was a small miracle that Anor Keep hadn't devolved into a paranoia-fueled riot. It was only a matter of time before something set off the mass of twitchy twinkle fingers. And tonight, it finally happened. A loud screech. Okay, so this is where we want the... It was only a matter of time before something set off the mass of twitchy twinkle fingers. It was only a matter of time before something set off the mass of twitchy twinkle fingers. And tonight... Alright, so right here is when we want these sound effects to start up. This is where the ambience is gonna slowly start crawling in. Massive, creepy castle. And a loud screech. Not sure what kind of screech yet. Let's just put here. A loud screech pierced the stormy darkness as a gargoyle fell to the earth with a massive... I wonder if you... Neven, are you still there? Because it says fell to earth. I wonder if you mean fell to the earth, because it's not capitalized. A loud screech pierced the stormy darkness as a gargoyle fell to the earth with a massive, frozen hole punched clean through its chest. A loud screech pierced the stormy darkness as a gargoyle fell to earth with a massive, frozen hole punched clean through its chest. Should it be the earth or earth? Since it's not capitalized. I would think since it's not capitalized, it should be the earth, as in the ground. Three more followed by the time the alarm was raised, and 4 beholders were banished to their home dimension. No. 3 more followed by the time the alarm was raised, and 4 beholders were banished to their home dimension before they could report on who or what was assaulting them. People spilled into the courtyard, primed and ready for a confrontation. Undead rose from their buried positions, and demons were being rapidly summoned. The keep's magical defenses were activated, and a shimmering blue barrier covered the entire base, cutting off the icy rain while providing ample light. Okay, so I think that, okay, the earth, let's go ahead and fix that. A loud screech pierced the stormy darkness as a gargoyle fell to earth with their home dimension. Get rid of that one. So I think it's time for a new theme here. Or maybe we can just use the... Well, I was thinking about using the Mortimer theme, but I feel like we should just keep that to when we have like actual Mortimer themed things happening. So let's do another. I mean, I think we can just do another one that's church organ themed. Necromancer, let's say necromancer theme. Let's call it a necromancer theme. And let's give the narration a little more space here. Screech, music cue, narration. That's how it's going to work. Necromancy theme. And I will start a new thread called music. Tag Aaron. And there we go. I'll type that out later. What's up, Ahmed? Off the icy rain while providing ample light. And I think from here on, it should just be an action scene. Icy rain while providing ample light. This contingency was activated far too late, as the assailant was already inside, dropping the floating sentries left and right with frightening speed. The gathered people stared skyward, but they couldn't see any sign of an intruder. It was almost as if the levitating heads were being sliced apart by nothing. The unseen invader wrapped up the gargoyles in barely visible webs and gouged out their innards, rendering the tamed monsters just as ineffective. Not even a minute passed. Just as ineffective as what? Maybe just... It was almost as if the levitating heads were being sliced apart by nothing. The unseen I'm going to try this one again. The unseen invader wrapped up the gargoyles in barely visible webs and gouged out their innards, rendering them... I'm going to leave... I don't know. I'll question that. Not even a minute passed. Not even a minute passed before the fort's air... Not even a minute passed before the fort's air Not even a minute passed before the fort's air superiority was completely decimated. The unknown invader then started picking off the ground forces by crushing a random necromancer flat with an unseen force. 3 of his colleagues were decapitated simultaneously. Another's upper half disappeared, gobbled up by the invisible monster in one bite. The next victim didn't even feel anything as a blade cut him nearly in half top to bottom. It wasn't just the corpse talkers either. Warriors, rangers, rogues, wizards, warlocks, all were dismembered one after the other. Death spread seemingly at random, with no warning or reason behind it. As the violence spread, chaos and fear took hold. The hardened veterans who were desensitized to bloody battlefields kept their The hardened veterans who were desensitized to bloody battlefields kept their wits about them, but the newbies were another story. It was inevitable that one of them would make a horribly poor decision that made things worse. The first greenhorn to buckle was a barely level 20 necromancer. She was a homely-looking black-haired girl that frantically prepared a certain spell. It was one of the necromancer's few means of direct offense, and quite the powerful one to boot. Unleashing it in such a crowded space was going to hurt more people than it would protect, but the girl was already terrified beyond reason. The rookie snapped when she saw the man in front of her suddenly collapse without a head, blood spraying from the stump of his neck. Let's give this one to Dory.
Corpse explosion!
The incantation was unleashed in the next instant with the latest victim as the target. The fresh corpse exploded into a shower of boiling blood and flaming bone, injuring the caster and 3 other people in the process. Everyone's attention focused on the blast's location. By sheer chance, that desperately thrown-out spell had also caught the assailant in its wide area of effect. It dealt minimal damage, yet that was enough to knock out the optical camouflage that obscured their form. It was then that every person on the scene was finally able to lay eyes upon the monster that had been butchering them. It had a slender humanoid body, rather androgynous in shape. It was fully covered in an ice-like carapace so black it seemed to suck away what little light there was. The creature's right half was covered by steaming crimson blood, courtesy of that panicked incantation. Its hands and feet were adorned with bladed claws that put the gargoyle's natural weapons to shame. 8 crystalline appendages jutted out of its back, each tipped with a massive double-edged blade. A sleek, pointed abdomen that seemed more at home on a wasp than a spider hung from its lower back, where one might expect to find a tail. A sleek, pointed abdomen that seemed more at home on a wasp than a spider hung from its lower back, where one might expect to find a tail. What cemented this monster's arachnid origins, however, was the appearance of its head. It maintained It maintained vaguely human-like proportions, which was difficult to determine since it had spikes of tar-colored ice instead of hair. The same stuff also obscured its upper face, although a set of 8 orange The same stuff also obscured its upper face, although a set of 8 orange eyes glimmered just beneath the transparent mask. 2 pairs of massive, bladed mandibles flanked its mouth, forming an X as they clacked together. The maw behind them was unnaturally wide, seemingly encompassing over half of the head's lower region. Naturally, it was filled with teeth so sharp each of them might as well have been an arrow. Okay, and then here we have a picture that's fucking dope. I'm assuming this is, like, the same thing that Boxxy did with Korra in the last book, where he, like, fuses with Drea instead of Korra this time, though. Pretty dope looking. The observers were allowed a brief glance at the blade-like dentures as the creature had opened its mouth for one express purpose. I wasn't prepared for that one. Let's try that again. All right, that's one layer. Let's try another layer. Let's see how that sounds. There we go. I like that. And, oops. Let me try. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, I like that. A deafening screech washed over the fort, drowning out all other noise. The disorienting sound, the monster's truly nightmarish features, the side effects of Butcher of Humanity, and the full force of Despair aura blended together to create a wave of pure terror. It was so potent that people began fleeing for their lives, abandoning any pretense of working together or caring for another. Maybe caring for one another? It was so potent that people began fleeing for their lives, abandoning any pretense of working together or caring for one another. Those that didn't run still found their hearts pounding, hands shaking, lips quivering, and vision blurring. Since no priests or paladins could be found on this unholy ground, there was nobody around to shield the residents from this mental assault. The spider thing resumed its duty with extreme fervor. Enraged by having been revealed in such a clumsy manner, it was no longer content to just slice people open or bite chunks off them in a Enraged by having been revealed in such a clumsy manner, it was no longer content to just slice people open or bite chunks off them in passing. It activated Power Overwhelming and sent a horizontally oriented reality slash through the crowd. Dozens of men and women were bisected in an instant, sending sprays of blood through the air. Spell crystals and grenades were hurled all over the place, peppering the courtyard with flames, shrapnel, darkness, and even a supercharged singularity. Boxxy then moved on to rounding up those that tried to flee initially. It leapt through the air at a low angle, beheading people and undead alike as it bounced from shoulder to shoulder. The doppelstalker tossed wads of impact webbing all over the place, which expanded and wrapped around any poor sods they hit. It liberally sprayed acid on people, making them scream out in pain and further adding to the chaos. Some desperate souls sent their minions at it, barraged it with magic, or put up magical defenses, but all was for naught. Boxxy's malefic union with Drea had given it access to the counterspell skill, which allowed it to rip through any magic standing in its way. The mana locator gland hidden inside its body gave it omnidirectional awareness, allowing its numerous limbs to deflect attacks coming in from all angles at once. This is a badass scene. The rest of the people gathered didn't fare much better than the spellslingers. The few well-armored bodyguards were set ablaze by ebon fire, while the more agile ones fell victim to the shapeshifter's superior speed. It also created multiple copies of itself through mirror image, further increasing the rate at which the sheep were slaughtered. As for the ones that ran and actually made it out of the fort's confines, they would find themselves facing either a djinn... Excuse me. As for the ones... More water. As for the ones that ran and actually made it out of the fort's confines, they would find themselves facing either a djinn or an archfiend, depending on how terrible their luck was. Unfortunately for Boxxy, it lost track of time as it indulged in its natural urge to kill, maim, and devour. Malefic Union's 3 minutes expired all too soon, causing the monster to collapse on the spot. It vomited uncontrollably as its hard shell became a viscous sludge, rendering it unable to defend itself. All right, let's see here. It vomited. Let's go ahead and do a Boxxy vomit. On the spot. And we'll get Annie to do a sympathetic vomit as Drea. Drea vomiting uncontrollably, fused with Boxxy's body, so try to mimic my vomit. That's her note. Defend itself. Some of the adventurers noticed this moment of weakness and moved in to strike, but Boxxy's body doubles, which still maintained their pseudo-arachnid form, stepped in to protect it. These mirror images couldn't use many of the original skills and only commanded a fraction of its strength, but they were... These mirror images couldn't use many of the original skills and only commanded a fraction of its strength, but they were more than enough to cover Boxxy until it got back on its feet. Once it did, the Hilt Creeper wasted no time. Wielding Void Caller, it instantly summoned Drea back to the physical realm, where the two began merging once more. Unlike that first time with arms, Boxxy found claws a far more agreeable host. The process was still painful, but nowhere near as agonizing as with the Archfiend. It would appear that the once mimic and the former stalker were, for a lack of... It would appear It would appear that the once mimic and the former stalker were, for lack of a better word, extremely compatible. Thinking back on it, the monster's original instincts were quite similar to that of a spider, and it thoroughly enjoyed the use of arachnid limbs. In some ways, this outcome almost made sense, even though it really didn't. It wasn't necessarily a good thing, though. The merger between them was so seamless that Boxxy was finding it hard to differentiate its own personality from Claw's, her intents and habits reinforcing its own primal wants and needs. Damn it. It wasn't necessarily a good thing, though. The merger between them was so seamless that Boxxy was finding it hard to differentiate its own personality from Claw's, her intents and habits reinforcing its own primal wants and needs. That was why it found itself unable to resist, even if it was a risky or... That was why it found itself unable to resist taking a bite out of its victims now and then, even if it was risky or inefficient, or why it was so superbly pissed off it had been seen at... That was why it found itself unable to resist taking a bite out of its victims now and then, even if it was risky or inefficient, or why it was so superbly pissed off it had been seen as a result of that corpse explosion. Even though it practiced fusing with the web stalker leading up to this event, maintaining total control while in the thick of battle had proven exceptionally difficult. Having become a doppelstalker once more, Boxxy wasted no time Having become a doppelstalker once more, Boxxy wasted no more time resuming. Having become a doppelstalker once more, Boxxy wasted no more time. Having become a doppelstalker once more, Boxxy wasted no more time resuming its grim duty. This fodder hardly even stood a chance, though. The majority of them were magic wielders, the natural prey of demons like Claws. The rest were crushed under the monster's ridiculously bloated status. Regardless of whether they fought back, ran for their lives, or hid in a corner somewhere in the keep, they were all methodically hunted down and eliminated. Even as the second malefic union wore off and the shapeshifter was forced to rely on slightly less expedient means of murder rather than a battle. Even as the second malefic union wore off and the shapeshifter was forced to rely on slightly less expedient means of murder rather than a battle, the situation ultimately became a one-sided massacre that saw the death of 187 people within less than 20 minutes. All right, so, wow, it's a long action scene. Let's bring that here. Here's the vomit. And I think that will end the action scene. And that will also end the music. But we can keep the ambience. That'll be nice. Boxxy took down the last survivor by ripping their heart out with a bladed hand, which it viciously chomped on as the life faded from their eyes. And let's go ahead and do that. Boxxy took down the last survivor by ripping their heart out with a blade. And then we'll do this. Their eyes. A dreadful silence enveloped Anor Keep as the shapeshifter casually climbed atop the tallest tower and looked upon its work. There was blood everywhere, and mangled bodies were strewn all over. It was a gruesome, grisly scene that would surely make all but the most jaded of adventurers vacate the contents of their stomachs. The only thing that could have caused this much carnage was without a doubt a vicious monster who thrived on naught but death and violence. Okay. Let's see, how am I going to handle this? Let me listen back real quick. Ah! It vomited uncontrollably as its hard shell became a viscous sludge, rendering it unable to defend itself. Some of the adventurers noticed this moment of weakness and moved in to strike, but Boxxy's body doubles, which still maintained their pseudo-arachnid form, stepped in to protect it.
I actually need to change
These
this.
mirror images couldn't use many of the original skills and only commanded a fraction of its strength, but they were more than enough to cover Boxxy until it got back on its feet. Once it did, the Hilt Creeper wasted no time. Wielding Void Caller, it So it sounds like I'm continuing an action scene here, but I shouldn't be. Because it's all, like, distantly descriptive. Some of the adventurers noticed this moment of weakness and moved in to strike, but Boxxy's body doubled. Some of the adventurers noticed this moment of weakness and moved in to strike, but Boxxy's body doubles, which still maintained their pseudo-arachnid form, stepped in to protect it. These mirror images couldn't use many of the original skills and only commanded a fraction of its strength, but they were more than enough to cover Boxxy until it got back to its feet. Alright, so... Once it did, the Hilt Creeper wasted no time. Wielding Void Caller, it instantly summoned Drea back to the physical realm, where the two began merging once more. Unlike that first time with arms, Boxxy found... So there's a lot of, like, explaining here, which is why I decided to stop the action scene. I think maybe what I'll do right here, I'll go ahead and let the ambience fade. Then windy on top of a tower. We'll let that start there. The only thing that could have caused this much carnage was, without a doubt, a vicious monster who thrived on naught but death and violence. Crap. I got carried away, didn't I? This was a bit of a problem. The plan was to have Accatau, the current hero of death, take the blame for all this. However, nobody in their right mind would think this was the doing of the world's greatest assassin. Oh, well. The issue was more of a chore than a problem. The shapeshifter had already eliminated anything resembling a witness, so at this point it only had to set the scene. That would involve a whole lot of cleanup, which was why most of the tasks were delegated to the demonic trio. Snack was assigned to lookout duty, whereby she would keep watch for any approaching people from the air. Not that her master was expecting company. The only ones who would think of coming this way were members of the Order of the Black Wand who were running late, drunkards who lost their way, or idiots who didn't know any better. As unlikely as it was for someone to just show up at a place like this, it was vital that nobody saw it until it was done. Otherwise, this entire ruse would fall apart. Arms's considerable muscle power was put to use, carrying the bodies and their various bits into a huge pile in the courtyard. She naturally felt dissatisfied having to do menial labor, especially since she hadn't had enough fun. She only got to crush 20 or so skulls while she was watching the perimeter, which was more than most days, but not nearly enough violence to satiate her inherent bloodlust. Then again, as far as archfiends were concerned, pummeling every living thing on this world into soup wouldn't be enough. Then again, as far as archfiends were concerned, pummeling every living thing on this world into soup wouldn't be enough violence. As for Claws, she was given the task of processing the corpses. Anything that looked magical or shiny was stripped from the dead bodies and thrown into a nearby treasure chest for her master's later perusal. After looting a body, she would do one of two things to it. If the deceased wasn't afflicted with taboo, which could be felt even after their passing, then they would just be set aside to be eaten or absorbed. If they were a sinner, their skull would be removed and meticulously stripped of all skin, hair, flesh, muscle, and sinew. The webstalker took great pleasure in doing that with her own claws and teeth. Excuse me. She also got first pick of the tainted body's remaining organs for her midnight snack. In her eyes, this was an amazing reward, considering she didn't need to do much aside from lending her power. While all of that was going on, Boxxy got busy erasing any evidence of violence from inside the keep. It was one of the few things it had a natural talent for since the day it was born. Admittedly, the scale of this operation was unlike anything else it had ever had to deal with. Admittedly, the scale of this operation was unlike anything else it ever had to deal with, but that was just meant... Admittedly, the scale of this operation was unlike anything else it ever had to deal with, but that just meant the volume of work was bigger. The methods involved would still be the same. Blood splatters were either licked up or burned away with acid, depending on the surface. Rogue body parts were gobbled up, and any smashed-up objects were collected for later perusal. Disposal. Rogue body parts were gobbled up, and any smashed-up objects were collected for later disposal. Even scratches or gashes in the furniture or floorboards were covered up thanks to the monster's phytokinesis skill. The chips and cracks in the stonework were unsalvageable, but it was unlikely anyone would notice those. Even Boxxy had a hard time telling which of the markings had been there before it arrived. Cleaning the courtyard would be a bit trickier since the soil had soaked up much of the blood, but it wasn't impossible. Fortunately, it was still raining, so the monster merely had to bring down the siege barrier and let the weather dilute the bodily fluids for a few hours. Once its work was complete, the shapeshifter could leave the keep in a state that would make it impossible to think a large-scale fight had broken out. Once its work was complete, the shapeshifter could leave the keep in a state that would make it impossible to think a large-scale fight had broken out.
Master, we have an airborne intruder coming in from the... Master, we have an airborne intruder coming in from the east.
Unfortunately, Snack had made a rather untasty report before it could finish up.
Claws! Arms! You two get inside and hide!
It commanded.
I'm on my way up to see for myself.
Boxxy threw on Accatau's disguise and dashed to the roof of one of the central keep's towers. The rain had lessened to a light drizzle by now, allowing the monster an unobstructed view of the sky. The clouds had been dyed a fitting blood red by the sun that hadn't quite risen over the horizon, but there was something far more impressive flying just beneath them. Boxxy used Eagle Eye to zoom in on the dragon-shaped shadow and confirmed that it was, as one might expect, a dragon. One made out of bleached bones and stitched together with rotting flesh and muscle that was just barely keeping it whole. It had a wingspan of over 30 meters and was about 20 meters long from snout to spikes. It had a wingspan of over 30 meters and was about 20 meters long from snout to spike-tipped tail. It had a wingspan of over 30 meters and was about 20 meters long from snout to spike-tipped tail. Riding upon this unholy beast's back was someone the eyes of the dead god identified as another of Boxxy's targets. Arguably the most troublesome one on its naughty list. The writer was Nora Cromwell, a ranker. Boxxy was unpleasantly surprised to see her, as she was one of several necromancers who didn't respond to its invitation. It was understandable that not all of them would show up. Some probably felt they couldn't trust the guild with their lives and remained in hiding, while others couldn't be reached at all due to them being away on a quest or some other errand. Nora's case was quite different. Though, as she had clearly shown up ready for war. She probably felt quite confident going it alone, and with good reason. According to Boxxy's information, she was the only level 100 necromancer in the Order. She was also the Guildmaster's sister, and likely a big part of why the organization was so readily accepting of her kind. As for her ultimate skill, the only thing Boxxy knew was that it was called Bone Dragon, though it was painfully obvious what its effects were by now. However, it was worth noting that the thing she was riding wasn't actually a skeletal worm. Upon further inspection, Boxxy's enhanced eyesight determined it was merely an undead construct in the shape of one. Its skull, for example, was made out of the compressed remains of dozens, probably hundreds, of corpses. It made the shapeshifter quite curious whether this thing was anywhere near as strong as its legendary namesake. Luckily, it had just the guinea pig to test it out. Oh, that's great. Okay. All right, so let's do another musical theme here. We have Windy on top of a tower. We'll let that fade. But then we'll bring it back.
I'm on my way up to see for myself.
Boxxy. We'll go ahead and start back up here. Barely keeping it whole. It had a wingspan of over... Boxxy used Eagle of the sky. The clouds had been dyed a fitting blood red by the sun. Boxxy threw on Accatau. The rain had lessened to a light drizzle by now, allowing the monster an unobstructed view of the sky. The clouds had been dyed a fitting blood red by the sun that hadn't quite risen over the horizon, but there was something far more impressive flying just beneath them. Boxxy used Eagle Eye to zoom in on the dragon-shaped shadow and confirmed that it was, as one might expect, a dragon. Boxxy used Eagle Eye to zoom in on the dragon. Okay, and we'll call this one Dracolich. And let's list that down here. Dracolich. Riding upon this unholy beast's back was someone the eyes of the dead god identified as another of Boxxy's targets. Arguably the rider was Nora Cromwell, a ranker. Boxxy was unpleasantly surprised to see her go up. Some other errand. Nora's case was quite different, though, as she had clearly shown up ready for war. According to Boxxy's information, she was the only level 100 necromancer in the... She was also the Guildmaster's sister. However, it was worth noting that the thing she was riding wasn't actually a skeletal worm. All right, we'll end it here. Keep going. I'll end the music there.
Snack! Can she see you?
It out.
Snack! Can she see you?
It called out, so this is not a thought.
Snack! Can she see you?
It called out.
I don't think so, Master. I've covered myself with a cloud-shaped mirage.
Maybe she should be in thought.
I don't think so, Master. I've covered myself with a cloud-shaped mirage. I don't think so, Master. I've covered myself with a cloud-shaped mirage.
Then would you kindly introduce yourself by spraying your fire magic all over our guest's face?
As you command, my master.
Boxxy kept staring at the circling knot dragon in the sky while the djinn drew closer. The bone construct suddenly swerved around and unleashed its version of a dragon's most fearsome weapon, its breath. A stream of sickeningly green mist was ejected from its maw at high speeds, enveloping the invisible djinn and wiping all but her soul out of existence in a matter of seconds. Okay, not fire, acid. And I'll go ahead and create some more vocals to go with it. Maybe I'll put it in the efforts group instead. Breath. A stream of breath. A stream of breath. A stream of sickeningly breath. A stream of nice. Okay. In a matter of seconds. A level 100 adventurer would surely have countermeasures against something like illusions and mirages, especially if she had shown up expecting trouble. The shocking part was how much power was behind the attack that just hit Snack. Even Boxxy might get wiped out if it took that thing head-on. It would appear that, even if it was a knockoff, that dragon was quite formidable. However, it was ultimately just another undead pawn under a necromancer's control, which meant it had three key weaknesses. Which meant it had three key weaknesses. Control. Which meant it had... The first was fire magic. This was Snack's specialty, though... The first was fire magic. This was Snack's specialty, though it was quite obvious she'd be unable to get in close enough to actually use it. The second was holy magic, which Boxxy did not have access to since Fizzy was still unaccounted for. The third and arguably most exploitable weakness was Nora herself. If she could be eliminated, then her minion would lose cohesiveness and crumble to bits. The problem was that her bony beast was covering her completely, making it quite difficult to get a clean shot. Boxxy could theoretically float up there to get a better angle, but maintaining the flight spell and engaging in combat were mutually exclusive activities, unless one had the right skill. Any ranged attack would have to be launched from the ground, but hitting her from its current position was outright impossible. Unless, of course, the shapeshifter could somehow curve its shots. Up in the air, Nora was silently cursing under her breath. She had come here because that invitation smelled fishy. Rumors tended to spread at the speed of light, so she was aware that her guild's necromancers were being targeted, but the Order offering them protection? But the order offering them protection? It was ludicrous to think targeted. It was ludicrous to think It was ludicrous to think her brother would ever approve something that expensive. He wasn't a cheapskate, but he was far too frugal to spend so much gold on a bunch of nobodies. She would understand if he did it just to protect her and maybe a few of the more promising ones, but that wasn't the case. Otherwise, she would have received a secret communication or message or something, anything, to explain his intentions. Unfortunately, the man had disappeared abruptly without a word, which only deepened her worries. She therefore came here, as it was the only lead she had on her missing brother. And what did she find? A bloodied courtyard, a pile of bodies, a floating pest, and a masked lizard standing atop one of the keep's tallest towers. Granted, she didn't have a scout's trained eyesight and couldn't make out any details since she was over 100 meters away, but she still concluded two things. One, she had just missed the party, and two, that scaly bastard was either directly involved or outright responsible. As she glared down at him, she noticed something else. Streaks of shimmering blue flew towards her at breakneck speeds. She stopped peering over her seat in between the massive spikes along the bone dragon's spine and ducked behind the protrusions to protect her. Nope. She stopped peering over her seat in between the massive spikes along the bone dragon's spine and ducked behind the protrusions to protect her head. The attacks coming from below shattered against the beast's underside with loud noises akin to glass breaking. That's ice, I guess. They did a grand total of 0 damage, nullified by the Bone Dragon's Chill of the Grave perk. It was something present within all undead with corporeal forms and the source of both their immunity to cold-based damage and their vulnerability to fire. Nora was not an idiot. Even if that warning shot did nothing, the fact that her suspect was able to hit a fast-moving target like her pet at this distance was immensely impressive. It showed he was a ranger of considerable level and not someone she should underestimate. It also made her question if that really was the hero of death. She had never met Accatau, but she knew of him from her brother, and this didn't seem like his handiwork. Not that it mattered at this point. Regardless of the stranger's identity, it was clear he'd take her head off if she gave him the opportunity, so she resolved to avoid doing that as much as possible. Casting the Sight of Korolog spell upon her gigantic minion, she was able to perceive the world through its senses. She began controlling the almost dragon more actively, making it turn towards the archer. He fired dozens of arrows at her, but they all smashed hopelessly against the creature as it dived closer. That's right, she's got an ice bow. Kira has an ice bow. Neven says, so I think the extra vomit layer is unnecessary. One's Sorry. That is just a funny-ass thing for someone to tell someone else. Once close enough, the worm unleashed its breath once again with the intent to kill. Nora had determined this was not an opponent she could safely capture alive, but she could still interrogate his corpse. Assuming something was left behind, of course. However, Boxxy's servants triggered the fort's magical defenses before the stream of decay could reach their master, causing the bone dragon's attack to be repelled by the siege barrier. Nora clicked her tongue in frustration. While her pet's strongest move was stupidly effective against living things, it didn't do much against inanimate objects or magical barriers. These were the ups and downs of using concentrated blight as a weapon. The blast did have a corrosive property to it, but it was nowhere near potent enough to breach those military-grade defenses. This shortcoming was why she had denied participating in the recent war, which turned out to be the right decision considering how many of her peers had fallen. Admittedly, she was rather thrilled when she learned that pompous bastard of a holy necromancer had bitten the big one, but she had more pressing matters to worry about. Another volley of arrows came in from the archer, passing through the one-way barrier and peppering the undead abomination once again. These were different from the first, however, as they exploded violently in fire and smoke. The bone dragon was far too tough to fall to those, but they obscured its vision and forced Nora to pull up all the same. She was continually bombarded with more of the weird, flat-headed projectiles, but they became easier and easier to evade the higher her altitude. As she climbed, Nora realized this fight wasn't in her favor. If her enemy could damage her pet, but she couldn't return the favor, then the outcome was obvious. The best course of action was to flee. So she did. The necromancer turned the faux dragon's head around to look back over its shoulder as it flew further away from the keep. Its glowing blue eyes showed her that more bomb-tipped arrows were incoming, which she reacted to by firing back a half-powered breath. Even if its corrosive effects were relatively weak, they were more than enough to prematurely detonate the explosive devices and cover her retreat. Just then, a stream of more enchanted ice arrows flew out of the smog. Nora's focus sharpened, as she wasn't sure why her enemy would keep using ineffective attacks. It was only when it became obvious they'd fly harmlessly over the dragon's back that she allowed herself to relax the tiniest bit. This was exactly the opening her opponent intended to exploit, as, in that moment, the magical projectile swerved unnaturally towards her. Nora nudged her ride to roll to the left in a panicked response, but it was far too late. A total of 5 icy arrows ripped right through her robe and the chainmail armor underneath, despite their enchantments. The projectiles dug deep into the woman's back. She screamed out in pain as the searing sensation was instantly replaced by biting cold when the wounds began to ice over. She struggled to maintain a grip on her consciousness as heat rapidly left her body, and she fumbled around the potion pack strapped to her hip to administer some first aid. Okay, so the attacks coming from below shattered against the beast's underside with loud noises akin to glass breaking. They did a grand total of 0 damage, nullified by the bone dragon's Chill of the Grave perk. It was something present within all undead with corporeal form to fire. Nora was not an idiot. It showed he was a ring. It also made her question if she had never met Accatau, but not that it mattered at this point. Casting the Sight of Korolog spell upon... Okay, so we'll do it here. Grab that action scene marker.
Casting the...
When does it change perspective?
But the Order offering them protection? It was ludicrous to think her... The first was fire magic. This was Snack's special. The third and arguably most exploitable... If she could be eliminated, then... The problem was that her bony beast was covering her... Boxxy could theoretically float up there, unless one had the right skill. Any ranged attack would have to be launched, unless, of course, the shapeshifter could somehow curve. Up in the air, Nora was...
Alright, and we'll bring that here.
Air, Nora...
Okay. And we're going to duplicate this. Instead of Windy on top of a tower, on the back of the dragon. Flying in the air. Oops. Oops. There we go. And we'll start
casting the Sight of Korolog spell upon her gigantic minion.
Low-key action.
Back that she allowed herself to relax the tiniest bit. This was exactly the opening her opponent intended to exploit, as Nora nudged her ride to roll to the left in a panicked response, but it was far too late. A total of 5 icy arrows.
Okay.
Her enchantments. The projectiles dug deep into the woman's back. She screamed out in pain as the searing centrally towards her. Nora nudged her ride to roll the last bit. This was exactly the opening her opponent intended to exploit, as, in that moment, the magical projectile swerved unnaturally towards her.
All right, and then... All right, there we go. Another musical shift as soon as she gets hit, basically.
And she fumbled around the potion pack strapped to her hip to administer some first aid. Down on the ground, Boxxy continued firing Winter's Bite. Unfortunately, it had lost the angle it needed to allow the artifact-grade bow's heat-seeking arrows to curve around the necromancer's cover. If it was too wide, they wouldn't pick her up at all. If it was too close, they would end up hitting the dragon. Thankfully, the beast was cold as death, so they only had one viable target, one that it had just severely injured, yet lived. The not a dragon's flight path was a bit wobbly and unsteady, but it was clearly not dead. Or was that re-dead? Undead? Undead? Boxxy never knew what word to use in these situations. What about destroyed? Yeah, that worked. The not a dragon's yet lived. Cover. If it was too wide, they wouldn't pick her up at all. If it was too close, they would end up hitting the dragon. Down on the ground, Boxxy continued.
Okay. And... I mean, is he on the ground or is he still on top of the tower, though? Let's go ahead and... I think I can stop the action scene for a second.
Yeah, that worked. Semantics aside, Boxxy still had a job to finish, so it put away the crystal bow and started focusing its magic onto its own body. Semantics aside, Boxxy still had a job to finish. Yeah, that worked. That worked. Semantics aside, Boxxy still had a job to finish, so it put away the crystal bow and started focusing its magic onto its own body.
And let's get the music going again.
Flight!
Its body shot up into the air as the lizard man-shaped monster gave chase. It steadily gained on its target, but doubted it could reach Nora in time. It steadily gained on its target, but doubted it could reach Nora in time. As convenient as it was, flight was a spell with certain hard limits. One had to keep their body as one had to keep excuse me. One had to keep their body as still as possible to maintain it, and it would only last a certain amount of time or a set distance traveled, depending on which limit was reached first. It also had a top speed and a maximum altitude, the last of which was the most pressing problem given the necromancer's mostly vertical trajectory. Boxxy had a fix for that, though. Once it felt the flight spell reaching its height limit... Damn. Excuse me, guys. Once it felt the flight spell reaching its height limit, it reached into its storage. The sudden movement broke the spell, leaving nothing but inertia to carry the monster upward. Before gravity could fully reclaim it, the shapeshifter pulled out a grappling gun it had thrown together in its spare time. It was a one-shot wonder that would need to be reloaded with blast powder and then repaired in order to be refired, but that one shot was all the monster needed. It aimed the handheld device's barrel and pulled the trigger. The hook was launched with a loud bang and a gust of smoke, sending it flying towards the dragon-shaped skeleton. It hit the monster's flailing tail and lodged in between its bones. Boxxy climbed up the rope, which threatened to snap due from... Boxxy climbed up the rope, which threatened to snap due to the combined strain of the creature's weight at the lower end and the way it was swaying wildly in the wind. Nora was too busy treating her grievous wounds with healing potions to notice she had a hitchhiker. It was only when her heart was gouged out from behind that she realized her opponent had followed her aboard. Needless to say, it was far too late for her at that point. Monster's flailing tail and lodged in between its bones. Boxxy climbed up the rope, which threatened to snap due to the combined strain of the creature's weight at the lower end and the way it was swaying. Nora was too busy treating her grievous wounds with healing potions to notice she had a hitchhiker. It was only when her heart... at that point. With its master dead, the bone dragon let out a pathetic cry and grew still, after which it fell towards the ground. It was far too late for her at that point. With its master dead, the bone dragon let...
And let's do this.
With its master... With its master... With its master dead. With its master dead, the bone dragon let out a pathetic cry and grew still, after which it fell towards the ground. The ground. On its way down, it began to crumble into the countless bones that made up its body, just as Boxxy predicted. The macabre debris rained down on the swamp where they would remain scattered for good. That still left the matter of the plummeting shapeshifter, but it wasn't worried. Even though activating flight under these circumstances would probably be impossible, it didn't need to. Even though activating flight under these circumstances would probably be impossible, it didn't need to even make the attempt. It leapt off the decaying pseudo-dragon and sprouted a quartet of leathery demonic wings, which it used to glide back to the ground and land without much incident.
Okay.
To even make the attempt. It leapt off the decaying pseudo-dragon and sprouted a quartet of leathery demonic wings. And land without much incident.
I think that'll end the action scene.
Without much incident. As satisfying... As satisfying... Where to go? As satisfying as that kill had been, however, it would appear it hadn't been enough. Aside from the 5 other blips on its divine radar, Boxxy's augmented vision also spotted what seemed to be Nora's tainted soul darting off towards the horizon at a speed no mortal could match. That was the only explanation it could think of for why her glow hadn't disappeared like the others. The quest progress counter didn't go up either, which, when combined with past experiences, led Boxxy to one plausible explanation. Its quarry was about to become a lich, not unlike the woman called Valeria from the Boxxy's...
Nope, not the Boxxy. Neven, you still there? If you are, you should probably contact your editor, because, I'm finding all these typos.
Its quarry was about to become a lich, not unlike the woman called Valeria from Boxxy's final days as a mere mimic, better known to the creature as Nasty. This was an issue, but ultimately amounted to little more than a brief delay. While that pervert had been a formidable opponent when they first met, the shapeshifter had grown astonishingly... While that pervert had been a formidable opponent when they first met, the shapeshifter had grown astonishingly more powerful since then in every imaginable aspect. It was quite confident it could take Nora down a second time, especially since changing bodies like that would have deprived her of both her ultimate skill and her level 100 necromancer job. Needless to say, a powerless being like that offered so little of a challenge that she would not be worth a single drop of XP. To make matters better, or worse, depending on the point of view, her tainted spirit was even flying in the direction of another of its marks. Boxxy was quite confident it could still accomplish the quest well before the time limit. In fact, with a bit of luck, it would already be done with his business. In fact, with a bit of luck, it would already be done with this business and back in Azure Vale an entire week. In fact, with a bit of luck, it would already be done with this business and back in Azure Vale an entire week before the deadline, perhaps even earlier. That was just how much of a resounding success Operation People Herder had been. As for the Imperial authorities, the only thing they would find at Anor Keep would be a spotless yet deserted fortress. That, and a bunch of polished, taboo-ridden skulls strewn across its courtyard in a way that spelled out one of Mortimer's most famous and infamous decrees. Death brings absolution.
All right. That was a long chapter. Let's see. 42 minutes. And where are we at in percentage? 17%. I'm going to 22% today. So, that set is finished. Go ahead and collect all and save. Start a new set. Just want to make sure.
Mortimer's most famous and infamous decrees. Death brings absolution. Infamous decrees. Death brings absolution.
We can just get rid of this from there. All right. Save again. Open up this new chapter. And I'm going to take a tiny break, guys. I'll be right back. it. There we go. Who is, I love lamp. Who is Facebook user today? Being creepy and weird. Whoever it is. Okay. Let's get this back going. And let's start on chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Growing Pains. Part 1. Boxxy had miscalculated. The shapeshifter watched helplessly as Nora Cromwell flew off towards the horizon to the south. While the monster had been correct in assuming she had become an undead lich, the bone dragon she was riding made it clear that she did not, in fact, lose her level 100 necromancer job. The woman had already bound her soul to a phylactery through some ungodly ritual years ago, allowing her to retain most of her original status. She had done this as a sort of insurance for the inevitable day when she would perish, though she collected on it much sooner than She had done this as a sort of insurance for the inevitable day when she would perish, though she collected on it much sooner than anticipated. However, Boxxy did not know that. It had mistakenly used Valeria's transformation into a lich as the standard. In retrospect, it was a bit ludicrous to think that a lich's natural life cycle involved getting killed, being revived by a dungeon as a banshee, breaking free of it, and only then possessing a phylactery. In retrospect, it was a bit ludicrous to think that a lich's natural life cycle involved getting killed, being revived by a dungeon as a banshee, breaking free of it, and only then possessing a phylactery. This misunderstanding was why the shapeshifter failed to consider the possibility that Nora would maintain her mystical abilities. Otherwise, it would have made a beeline for her position instead of saving her for last. At least it wasn't as if it put off tracking her down out of something as self-destructive as arrogance. Following the events at Anor Keep, the former human soul had flown off towards the other side of the Empire, landing somewhere on the southwestern edge of the continent. Now that there were only a handful of targets left, Boxxy was able to determine the shortest route to connect the dots between them, which, coincidentally, put Nora at the very end of the list. Since it had assumed she'd be a pushover, it didn't think to prioritize her. Therein lay the root of the problem. Boxxy's ignorance caused it to underestimate the lich and give her too much time to gather her strength. When the shapeshifter eventually came for her a second time, she was ready. It tried to sneak up on her physical form in order to assassinate her and use the Eye of the Dead God to track down her phylactery through her befouled spirit. However, the monster lacked the ability to evade magical detection, so Nora's Detect Life skill, courtesy of her new lich job, had picked it up long before it was in striking distance. Once she realized she was still being targeted, Nora decided to play it safe and ran away at full speed aboard her reconstructed zoo. Once she realized she was still being targeted, Nora decided to play it safe and ran away at full speed aboard her reconstructed pseudo-dragon. Boxxy would have given chase, but its final target had flown south across the ocean, likely headed for the next continent over. Since she was riding a tireless flying beast in pristine condition, it could not hope to match her speed with just flight. It might have been able to keep up if it was running over dry land, but swimming had never been its strong suit. Plus, crossing the shimmering ocean was notoriously difficult due to the gigantic sea monsters and violent storms that frequented those waters. Plus, crossing the shimmering ocean was notoriously difficult due to the gigantic sea monsters and violent storms that frequented. I hate that word. Plus, crossing the shimmering ocean was notoriously difficult due to the gigantic sea monsters and violent storms that frequented those waters. The only feasible way to follow the lich to her destination was to charter a boat or look into hiring aerial transport in the shape of a griffin. However, the former would take far too long to get there, and the latter was out. Since cross-continental flights couldn't be booked by just anyone. As such, with just 11 days left before the year-end quest ended, Boxxy had to begrudgingly give up on it. Admittedly, it was highly unlikely the lich would go blabbing about who really wiped out Anor Keep, but that small upside failed to quell the monster's fury. It wasn't angry just because Nora had gotten away and wasted weeks of effort, but also at itself for making such a blunder. The core of the issue was that it had underestimated adventurers' resourcefulness. Perhaps arrogance was the root cause after all. It was such an infuriatingly stereotypical and basic mistake, it felt like wiping out an entire city just to vent its frustrations. Speaking of which, wasn't that place nearby? Boxxy tore its hateful glare away from the point in the horizon where Nora had disappeared and took a closer look at its surroundings. The lich's recent handiwork had tainted the area with blight and killed off much of the vegetation, but it soon realized why this foggy swampland felt oddly familiar. It was currently standing on the edge of the whispering marshes that lay south of the city of Erosa, which was relatively near the calamity of Monatal. The shapeshifter needed to distract itself somehow, so it decided it might as well check in on its birthplace after all this time. It threw on a hooded traveler's cloak and heavy-looking backpack, assuming the guise of a wandering human merchant. It threw on a hooded traveler's cloak and heavy-looking backpack, assuming the guise of a wandering human merchant. It was still the middle of the day, so it proceeded towards Erosa at a brisk pace that wouldn't arouse suspicion. It soon saw the city's familiar walls in the distance, which triggered an odd surge of nostalgia. Sure, this was the place where that man Edward had captured it and crippled it by removing its warlock job, but it was also where it met Corny Fizzlesprocket, the gnome that eventually became its most prized shiny. However, as Boxxy drew closer, it realized the place had been abandoned. The gates were wide open and unguarded, and there wasn't a single sign of life on the streets. The creature investigated the area out of curiosity and almost immediately spotted a clue. Copies of the same poster seemed to have been plastered all over the city, though its full contents proved more difficult to read than anticipated. Rain, snow, and wind had ruined whatever postings weren't already ripped up or otherwise vandalized. The monster continued searching for an intact copy of the document. While it did, it happened to come across a certain hovel. It was a simple dwelling fit for a no-name peasant, yet it stood out because of the pair of chest-sized holes on the opposite sides of its walls. It was a simple dwelling fit for a no-name peasant,
Yet it stood out because of the pair of chest-sized holes on the opposite side of its walls. The monster realized this was the same building Edward had kicked it through during its capture, so it vented some of its frustrations by annihilating the structure with a dark explosion. That bit of petty revenge felt good, and more importantly, helped clear up the peeved creature's thoughts. It realized the posters were probably issued by the local government, meaning the best place to find a legible copy was at the keep. Sure enough, it found plenty of them littering the ground. Just inside the entrance. Without further ado, it picked up the cleanest-looking one and gave it a quick read. Notice of mandatory relocation. Attention, proud people of Erosa. As many of you have already heard, the poisonous smog released by the calamity of Monatal is slowly spreading with no end in sight. Though the Sawblade Mountains to the north keep it from spilling out of Cradle Valley and infecting the heartlands of our beloved empire, this fair city will sadly not be spared. Members of the Arcanium, who are working tirelessly to counteract and contain this threat, have determined the region surrounding Erosa will be unsuitable to support life within half a year. His Majesty, Emperor Joseph Frederick von Einhart III, has therefore decreed that all law-abiding citizens are to vacate the city of Erosa by the last day of the month of Juniper. Please rest assured that the Empire will provide funds, provisions, and protection to facilitate the smooth relocation of all citizens from the city and its neighboring settlements. Those who refuse to evacuate the city by the specified deadline will be found in violation of an imperial decree and will be punished accordingly. I understand that being forced out of one's home may seem harsh and unfair, but I ask that all citizens keep in mind that this is for their own safety and well-being. Signed, Thomas Broadhurst, Lord Mayor of Erosa. Well, that certainly explained why this place was a ghost town. That deadline had expired more than 3 months ago. Boxxy was curious exactly how far that toxic cloud had spread, so it climbed one of the central keep's towers to get a better vantage point. There didn't seem to be anyone around to stop it from trespassing, but it moved stealthily just in case. Once it reached the top, it looked to the northwest, the direction this smog was supposedly rolling in from. Using Eagle Eye, it confirmed that the land itself seemed to be slowly dying, as a huge portion of the luscious, dense troll woods were gray and barren. There was also an ominous, bright green cloud hanging heavily in the air, far in the distance. There seemed to only be about 2 or 3 kilometers of healthy soil between the city and the encroaching fog, which was probably why not even vagrants could be seen around. The sheer scale of this ongoing disaster made the shapeshifter worry if it should have been seeking Zephyra's forgiveness rather than... The sheer scale of this ongoing disaster made the shapeshifter worry if it should have been seeking Zephyra's forgiveness rather than Teresa's. It most certainly did not want the web of lies it built in Azure Vale to unravel because some fickle goddess branded it with taboo. And let's start some ambience here. The sheer scale of this ongoing disaster... Well, maybe not. Ring, ring. The monster was still staring at the decaying tree line in the distance when it got a call from Demon Zaras, which it knew to answer as soon as possible. Click.
Yes? Yes?
Oops.
Hey, buddy! Carl here.
Hey, Carl.
You doing anything important?
Not really.
That's good, because the big man would like a word with you. Should I patch him through?
Sure. Been meaning to speak with him anyway.
Click.
Boxxy!
Came Rupert's cheerful voice.
Sorry for interrupting your brooding, but I just realized something. It's about the quest I asked you to take care of on Morty's behalf.
I don't think I can get it done before I hit the deadline. That one necromancer got away, and I can't catch up to her in the next 11 days.
Yeah, about that. Since you're my hero, rather than Morty's, I was the one responsible for handing you the task. Thing is, I misunderstood what the bony bastard meant. The deadline for it wasn't by year's end, but within 1 year.
You're telling me I didn't have several weeks, but 12 full months?
Pretty much.
Boxxy quietly and rapidly processed this news. It weighed the likelihood of this blunder being intentional rather than accidental. It also considered the fact that, regardless of how it originated, the goddess of coincidences purposefully waited until now to clear this up. It was likely she wanted to watch the shapeshifter take unnecessary risks like Operation People Hurt. It was likely she wanted to watch the shapeshifter take unnecessary risks like Operation People Herder in order to keep things interesting. So, after carefully thinking things over, Boxxy reached a singular conclusion. I hate you.
Ha! Well, can't say I can blame you for that. It's not all bad, though. Morty's actually quite pleased with how things turned out. That stunt you pulled with the skulls has already put the fear of death into heretics throughout the Empire. That was the point of this whole endeavor to begin with, so I'd say your job is pretty much done.
Yeah, I thought as much. That said, do you mind marking this quest as complete?
No can do, Boxxy. Though it was presented as a quest, what you accepted was a devil's contract. Same stuff as what your familiars are bound by, and I'm sure you're aware how strict those are. So, I'm afraid a progress counter that's one short of completion is not enough to claim your prize.
Of course it's not. I'm starting to wonder if I really want to bother with this bullshit. I mean, what the crap is that Teresa's forgiveness even about?
Oh, that? How should I put this? Let's just say Teresa owed both me and Morty for all the shenanigans she pulled leading up to her Let's just say Teresa owed both me and Morty for all the shenanigans she pulled leading up to her rehabilitation. So, I got her to agree to officially pardon your crimes against her people. Mind you, she'll still hate your guts afterwards, but she'll be able to tell her Inquisition that the perpetrator behind the calamity has paid for their crimes against humanity in good conscience.
Just like that?
Just like that,
Confirmed Julian.
It's mostly a formality, to be honest. Though the mortals may have some trouble accepting it, your death already absolved you of your sins as far as the Pantheon is concerned.
You sure about that? I mean,
Not that I'm complaining, but I did come back to life. Not by your own hand or intention, though. Unlike that necromancer from earlier, your resurrection was entirely out of your control. Aside from the dying part, and the soul of the one who did that has already been claimed by Morty's hero. So, all square and settled as far as I'm concerned. Oh. You know you could have mentioned all this earlier, right? I thought it was rather obvious. Did you seriously think that the very words you spelled out with skulls didn't apply to you? How would I know? This entire thing sounds like a flimsy technicality to me. Technicality or not, such are the laws of this world as decreed by its deities. And those, my box-minded friend, do not allow exceptions. Except when they do. Whatever. My point is, I still haven't heard anything that would make me want to keep this up. I'm not going to run around doing your guys' dirty work if all I have to show for it is forgiveness and favors. Don't be like that. I assure you I have some tasty rewards lined up for you. I was actually planning to get rid of that cat job for you at some point. You'd like that, wouldn't you? I wouldn't be against it, no. That's not even the big one. I'm planning to tell you all about the divine class item I personally created. I'm planning to tell you all about the divine class item I personally created, so long as you keep up the good work.
Boxxy immediately salivated at the mention of the highest rank of magic equipment. It had previously only heard rumors of the divine tier of gear and wasn't sure if it truly existed, but now it had confirmation directly from McCoy. However, its enthusiasm rapidly made a nosedive when it remembered who it was speaking to. The god of chance was very particular about his words, so it was not a good idea to take them at face value. A certain phrase particularly stood out.
What do you mean? You'll tell me about it, it asked dubiously. I'll tell you. I'll let you know its location. I'll let you know its location, its function, and how to obtain it, explained Rick. Whether you want to chase after it is up to you. So, what do you say? All right, fine. I'll see about tracking that lich down eventually. Right now, I really should head home and deal with the situation there. Whatever you want, little guy. Girl? Thing? What about Fizzy? You promised you'd tell me where she is. I did, didn't I? I did, didn't I? Well, I have some time to kill, so I can get that over with right now if you want me to.
Please do. Boxxy set off for the nearest major city, while Greg explained what the missing mithril golem had been up to. Apparently, she escaped the destruction of the vault beneath the mountain by accidentally teleporting herself to one of the 3 moons. To Skuna, to be specific. Apparently, there was some business involving moon gnomes and moon bugs that she was uniquely suited to handling on the gods' behalf. To Skuna, to be specific. Apparently, there was some business involving moon gnomes and moon bugs that she was uniquely suited to handling on the gods' behalf. Unfortunately, as much as it wanted to blast off and retrieve her that very instant, Boxxy lacked the ability to teach. Unfortunately, as much as it wanted to blast off and retrieve her that very instant, Boxxy lacked the ability to reach Skuna since the device Fizzy used to get there was vaporized. The golem had to make it back under her own power, and that was extremely unlikely to happen before year's end. At least Chloe seemed confident the radiant construct would return to Azure Vale eventually, so Boxxy only had to wait. The relatively good news reinvigorated the shapeshifter as it began the long journey home. though it didn't head there directly. Its first stop was the city of Stanmore, a major port around 100 kilometers east of Erosa. Once there, it began gathering some information. on ships headed out. Once there, it began gathering some information on ships headed out to the southern continent. It was planning on heading there eventually, so now was a good time. It was planning on heading there eventually, so now was as good a time as any to scope things out. It visited a guild called Dave's Mariners, which, despite the plain name, was the best in the country when it came to intercontinental voyages. It confirmed the trip was indeed quite lengthy, dangerous, and expensive. Those nautical experts assured their visitor that only 14 out of the 57 voyages they undertook over the past year had suffered casualties, and only one was completely wiped out. This, apparently, was an impressive track record. After receiving a few more details about the trip and what to expect for future reference, Boxxy visited a different guild. This one was called the Keepers of the Way. It was a magic-centric organization that specialized in teleportation and spatial manipulation. They had a network of wizards stationed around key outposts and villages to allow rapid transit via consecutive use of the gate spell. Their services were rather expensive and had a limited capacity, making it so wealthy individuals were their only clients. Boxxy had made use of their network quite extensively during its hunt, as it was much quicker and less tiresome than using Transfamiliar. The shapeshifter, still disguised as a wandering merchant, paid for a one-way trip to the royal capital of Oceanus. The journey was completed within half an hour. It could have transferred further north, but the price tag made it reconsider. It wasn't in that much of a hurry to get back, and it had given those bastards more than enough shinies already. It proceeded the rest of the way on foot, which, in Boxxy's case, meant that Snack flew on ahead while her master attended to other matters before swapping places. However, unlike the weeks it spent following Fizzy's trail around the Horkensaft Kingdom, it made much better use of its time. For one thing, it had discreetly stocked up on parts and components before it left Azure Vale, allowing it to steadily advance its artificer job in between Transfamiliar jumps. The blast-powered grappling hook it used during its first encounter with Nora, for example, was something it made The blast-powered grappling hook it used during its first encounter with Nora, for example, was something it made especially to tackle her ultimate skill. Granted, back then it wasn't sure whether something called Bone Dragon would do exactly what its name implied, but its endeavor had still paid off in the end. Yet, as useful as making gizmos and gadgets turned out to be, tinkering soon took a back seat to something else entirely. After Boxxy stole Remy Cromwell's wizard job, it realized something. If all its job slots were filled up, it would be able to use cadaver absorption as much as it wanted without fear of contracting another useless vocation it couldn't get rid of. There might have been some monster job that was worth it even at level 25, but it had no idea where or even if such a thing could be found. Until then, however, it could continue to acquire seemingly limitless amounts of skills and attributes without any negative long-term repercussions. The monster only wondered why it didn't realize this sooner. It wouldn't have gotten rid of that rogue job it got during the war if it did. Then again, it got a much tastier occupation as a replacement, so perhaps it wasn't too bad a decision. Retrospect aside, it ended up going on something of an absorption spree ever since that night when it killed the Order of the Black Wands guildmaster. Boxxy fed more than 5 Boxxy fed more than 500 corpses into its cadaver absorption skill since that revelation. It had gotten a total of 81 successes, 2 jobs, 15 skills, and 64 attribute boosts. The jobs in question were Warrior and Goblin, both of which disappeared into nothingness since its job slots were full. The total amount of stolen attributes were easily in the hundreds and spread out rather randomly, though the majority of them had gone into strength, agility, and endurance. Not surprising, considering monsters were its primary targets, and creatures with relatively tough bodies were far more common than those with inherent magical or mental abilities. The skills had some duplicates and overlaps with the shapeshifter's existing abilities, but it still managed to secure 9 new ones. Out of the 2 purely defensive ones, the first was a gargoyle's padded skin, which reduced damage taken from blunt trauma by a flat amount. The other was Dense Danger. The other was Sense Danger, which it lifted off a deer. It supposedly helped the creature pick up on nearby threats, but Boxxy wasn't sure how reliable this thing was. It supposedly helped the creature pick up on nearby threats, but Boxxy wasn't sure how reliable this thing was, considering it did nothing to help its former owner. The offensive skills were far more interesting. It had gotten Vile Blades off a hobgoblin, which allowed it to spend a bit of MP to coat any handheld bladed weapons with a toxic substance that dealt additional damage over time. Another Janther gave it Aerial Strikes, which enhanced jumping melee attacks. A mid-level monk contributed Path of the Dragon, a staff-based combat style that relied on heavy attacks to punch through an opponent's defenses in one hit. Boxxy didn't typically fight with a staff, but it used Void Collar on occasion since the artifact's heft. Boxxy didn't typically fight with a staff, but it used Void Collar on occasion since the artifact's heft and sturdiness made it an effect. Boxxy didn't typically fight with a staff, but it used Void Collar on occasion since the artifact's heft and sturdiness. Boxxy didn't typically fight with a staff, but it used Void Collar on occasion since the artifact's heft and sturdiness made it an effective— Boxxy didn't typically fight with a staff, but it used Void Collar on occasion since the artifact's heft and sturdiness made it an effective bludgeoning weapon, so it saw some potential use in this skill. The fourth and final offensive ability was Web Throw, a skill from a giant spider that allowed it to entangle its target in sticky thread from afar. This one was very similar to Claw's impact webbing, though it had a significantly lower range. In terms of utility, Boxxy was only able to acquire alchemical fortitude off a dwarven alchemist living by himself in the mountains. It raised the user's tolerance for magical mixtures, allowing them to consume a lot more before succumbing to potion sickness. It raised more to go. It raised Mortimer's It raised the user's tolerance for magical mixtures, allowing them to consume a lot more before succumbing to potion sickness. It also slightly lessened the effects of potions, but the creature's legendary endurance rendered that a moot point. It was unusual that this was the hermit's most well-developed ability, though the research journal in his cottage shed some light on that. Apparently, he had been developing an original alcoholic drink called a ginger gangbang, and had been testing it on himself ever since he turned his last willing subject permanently blind. Lastly were the two largely useless skills. The first of them was Dust Off, a gust of air meant to help harpies rapidly gain altitude. However, it was far too weak to lift a monster of Boxxy's considerable bulk. Not even growing a dozen wings or using Kira's weight reduction rings could help it get airborne. At least it learned how to make feathered wings rather than leathery ones by mimicking the avian humanoids, but it was still unable to soar without the flight spell. The other worthless ability was the monocular rage of a cyclops, which could only be activated if the monster's singular eye was blinded. This was not a condition Boxxy wanted to fulfill, even if it could. Those weren't all of the recent additions to the former Mimic's mind-bogglingly long skill list. There was also the matter of the monster's ranger job, which had grown to level 41 since Boxxy had used Winter's Bite to murder a number of high-value targets, including a ranker. This allowed the shapeshifter to pick up the Azure Vale skill, which could be used to put a bit of wind magic behind its shots. This allowed them to fly straight even in a crosswind and significantly increased their piercing power. It could only be activated once every 10 minutes and would only work on the next It could only be activated once every 10 minutes and would work on It could only be activated once every 10 minutes and would only work on the next 5 to 10 shots. It could only be activated once every 10 minutes and would only work on the next 5 to 10 shots based on level, but had the potential to be devastating, especially when combined with the right arrows and/or martial arts. It had acquired some of those as well. The Ranger's marksman skill had hit level 9. Allowing the use of Tornado Shot. This fired an elementally charged arrow which, upon striking a target, would create a miniature whirlwind capable of throwing people and monsters into the air. The stolen Path of the Dragon skill, on the other hand, had given knowledge of 2 staff techniques. These were Rising Claw, a vertical upward strike that had a bonus towards disarming the opponent's melee weapon, and Tail Sweep, a lightning-fast circular trip attack. All things considered, Boxxy's murderous tour of the Empire had proven to be immensely successful, just not in the way it originally envisioned. Having finally tapped into Cadaver Absorption's potential had allowed it to grow significantly more powerful than when it left Azure Vale. Having finally tapped into Cadaver Absorption's potential had allowed it to grow significantly more powerful than when it left Azure Vale. Having finally tapped into Cadaver Absorption's potential had allowed it to grow significantly more powerful than when... Having finally tapped into Cadaver Absorption's potential had allowed it to grow significantly more powerful than when it left Azure Vale. However, it time and again reminded itself not to get too cocky, as it had still made a good deal of mistakes. It had tripped the Guildmaster's alarms and let Nora slip away, which were painfully obvious signs that it was still sorely lacking in experience. And, much as the late Milo Fayhorn liked to say, experience was something that no amount of levels or attributes could make... And, much as the late Milo Fayhorn liked to say, experience was something that no amount of levels or attributes could make up for. Though he'd probably think different if he saw Boxxy's current status. Jesus. General information. You may skip to the next part. Boxxy T. Morningwood. Creeper. Hilt. 10 months old. Member of Hidden Arrow. Level 36 Doppelganger. Level 50 Mimic. Max. Level 5 Cat. Max. Level 66 Warlock. Level 66 Warlock. Level 23 Artificer. Level 41 Ranger. Level 39 Blade Dancer. Level 25 Wizard. Max. 7,984 out of 7,984 HP. 7,984 out of 7,984 HP, plus 31.9 per second. 6,242 out of 6,242 MP, plus 9.6 per second. Attributes. Strength, 924. Dexterity, 892. Agility, 850. Endurance, 1,294. Intelligence, 1,156. Wisdom, 643. Luck, 261. Mental Fortitude, 530. Charisma, 259. Perception, 377. Faith, 59. Natural Affinity, 118. Doppelganger skills. Mirror image, level 8. Pheromone control, level 10, max. Broken reflection, level 5. Puppet parasite, level 7. Spirit echo, level 3. Hilt metabolism, level 5. Mimic skills. Assassination, level 10, max. Storage, level 10, max. Cadaver absorption, level 10, max. Biomass, level 14. Natural armor, level 10, max. Metal mimicry, level 10, max. Mend flesh, level 10, max. Adaptive defense, level 10, max. Cat skills. Feline agility, level 10, max. Warlock skills. Summon familiar, level 10, max. Power overwhelming, level 10, max. Demonology, level 9. Crystallize magic, level 10, max. Chant reduction, level 8. Demonic insight, level 8. Despair aura, level 5. Soul link, level 7. Enslave demon, level 4. Graviton manipulation, level 5. Malefic union, level 3. Ranger skills. Tracking, level 8. Marksman, level 9. Whisper wind, level 7. Fleet-footed, level 7. Hunter's mark, level 5. Eagle eye, level 5. Razor volley, level 2. Blade dancer skills. Hornet style, level 10, max. Adagio variation, level 8. Winter lich waltz, level 8. Evasion, level 10, max. Rapid riposte, level 2. Flamenco de fuego, level 4. Wizard skills. Arcane stability, level 3. Mana shield, level 2. Residual feedback, level 3. Disruptive barrage, level 2. Hero skills. Chaotic disposition, level 1, max. Agent of chaos, level 1, max. Essence of concealment, level 1, max. Vengeance, level 1, max. Eyes of the Dead God, level 1, max. Martial skills. Sword mastery, level 15, max. Projectile mastery, level 10, max. Daggery mastery. Dagger mastery, level 11. Dagger mastery, level 11. Shield mastery, level 10, max. Staff mastery, level 6. Bow mastery, level 13. Axe mastery, level 6. Caster skills. Ruin mastery, level 17. Domination mastery, level 11. Primal mastery, level 6. Basic mastery, level 2. Arcane mastery, level 3. Other skills. Shapeshift, level 14. Phytokinesis, level 6. Acid spray, level 10, max. Divine attunement, level 4. Ruinous reach, level 5. Aerial strikes, level 3. Vile blades, level 2. Level 2. Monocular rage, level 1. Dust off, level 1. Padded skin, level 3. Path of the dragon, level 3. Sense danger, level 2. Web throw, level 2. Alchemical fortitude, level 2. Spells and martial arts. Ruin spells. Shadowbolt, Ebonfire, Frostbite, Dark Explosion, Shadowbind, Singularity, True Darkness, Massive Rejection, Reality Slash, Momentum Anomaly, Weightless Space. Domination spells. Mass Panic, Delirium, Dark Infusion, Mind Blast, Hysteria, Mind Control. Basic spells. Firebolt, Ice Bolt, Water Slicer, Air Hammer, Lightning Bolt. Arcane spells. The fuck is that? Oh, it's the Mind Trust meeting. Arcane spell. Where'd it go? Arcane spells. Arcane spells. Flame Jet, Frost Mine, Spark Blast, Earth Spike, Stabbing Rain, Flight. Other spells: Implosion, Transfamiliar, Demonate. Marksman Arts: Power Shot, Guided Arrow, Multi-Shot, Blast Arrow, Shrapnel Shot, Pinning Shot, Snipe, Chain Shot, Tornado Shot. Path of the Dragon Arts: Rising Claw, Tail Sweep. Perk List: Arcane Assassin, Monster Magic, Grand Theft Arcana, 2. Collateral Damage, Butcher of Humanity, Rare Golem Dismantler, Jade. Natural Enemy of Termites, Seeker of Redemption, Anti-Centennial, Nature's Bounty, Hero Killer, Soulbound, Hero of Chaos, Usurper of Justice, Slayer of Elf-Kind, Legendary Endurance, Usurper of Death, Rare Golem Dismantler, Aquamarine, Legendary Intelligence.
Do you guys remember Aquamarine? I would have thought that'd be Aquamarine, but... might be a typo. Get some more water. Wait a minute, I didn't check my percentage. Am I done for today? Nope, 2% more. Yeah, I don't know. I'll leave it for now, but I'll also mark it for the proofer.
Rare Golem Dismantler.
All right. One more push, and I'm done for today. Let's see here. This doesn't separate out the parts.
Part 2. The ground shook and falling snow swirled as the forest gate powered up. The usual line of waiting departees was there, albeit with a lot more shivering, sneezing, and snot than any other time of year. This was perfectly natural given the biting cold that swept over the gloomy plaza. This was perfectly natural given the biting cold that swept over the gloomy plaza. Even if Azure Vale's hilt tree canopy absorbed much of the otherwise heavy snowfall, the titanic trees could not stymie the breath of winter that blew in from the north. Thankfully, the frigid weather had no adverse effect on the ancient mass transit device. The forest gate successfully conjured a portal linking to... Thankfully, the frigid weather had no adverse effect on the ancient mass transit device, the forest gate successfully conjuring a portal linking it to its counterpart near the border. Did I say conjuring? The forest gate successfully conjured. The forest gate successfully conjured a portal linking it to its counterpart near the border. The crowd of bundled-up travelers gingerly walked through one side while a similar collection of people emerged from the other. The rattling of carts rose to deafening proportion, matched only by the wind whipping against the The rattling of carts rose to deafening proportion, matched only by the wind whipping against the colorful tarps and fabrics protecting countless goods from the frigid onslaught. Seen from afar, the scene could be mistaken for a river of mismatched cloth that filtered through the ring-shaped archway. Spotting a face in these shifting crowds would be nigh impossible, even if the people weren't covering their heads and faces. Yet the collective eyesight of all idle bystanders was unerringly drawn towards a certain individual. She had a relatively short, slender frame wrapped up in a heavy fur coat. A poofy hood and checkered scarf covered most of her head and face, but even the little that could be seen was enough for the people of Azure Vale to identify her. There was only one person the commoners could think of that sported that chocolatey skin, golden eyes, and untamed crimson hair. They were so familiar that they didn't even need to see her mouth to tell it was curved in a bright, life-affirming smile.
It's good to be back,
Kira shouted as she threw her arms up.
Miss Morgana, where do you want me to drop these off? Miss Morgana, where do you want me to drop off these?
The catgirl looked over her shoulder at the dwarf that just called out to her. He was part of a delivery company she hired to help transport a cartload of goods from the dwarven border all the way to the capital. The wagon, which was being pulled along by a stone goat, held the various spoils of her latest adventure. That considerable pile of loot that seemed far too much for a girl so young, yet it all was undoubtedly hers. She even had the customs documents to prove it. Though obtaining those cost her a fair bit of coin in taxes and fees. Matters of ownership aside, the delivery dwarf raised a good question.
Crap. I didn't think that far. There's too much stuff for me to take it home.
She paused to wipe her runny nose on the back of her gloved hand.
Yeah, the guild should do. You know where the CC is?
Sure do. Want me to head there?
Let me make sure I'm keeping this dwarf consistent.
Miss Morgana! Sure do.
Yes, please.
Nope.
Yes, please. Leave them with the Hidden Arrow office under my name and tell them I'll sort the stuff out later. Oh, there's also a crate marked volatile with a note attached. Tell the receptionist to send that to Miss Hilda. She'll know the one.
The package in question was the firebrand whiskey. that the elder berserker had requested. Maintaining good relations with such a powerful fighter was pretty high on the priority list for the monster behind that smile, so it was more than happy to oblige. Sure, it spent a small fortune on this stuff, but it was a worthwhile investment.
Understood, miss.
The dwarf nodded.
I take it you're not coming with?
No, I got some, urgent stuff I gotta do first.
What about the rest of my fee, then?
Right, just a second.
She rummaged through her coat's pockets for a few moments before pulling out a small satchel, which was tossed, then caught with a metallic jingle.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start up the
fire. There was only one person the commoners could, and these shifting crowds would be nigh impossible, even if the people weren't covering their heads and faces. Yet the collective eyesight of all idle bystanders was unerringly drawn towards a certain individual. She had a relatively short, slender frame wrapped up in a heavy fur coat. A poofy hood and checkered scarf covered most of her head and face, but even the little that could be seen was enough for the people of Azure Vale to identify her. There was only one person the commoners could think of that sported with a metallic jingle. The dwarf had a quick peek inside to confirm the amount, then nodded firmly.
Aye, that'll cover it. Have a nice day, Miss Morgana.
You too, Mr. Corkbutt.
The man took a deep breath. Just how hard was it to remember his name? The man took a deep breath. Just how hard was it to remember his name?
Corkbutt!
The man took a deep breath. Then again, the girl was too cute to get mad at, so he sucked it up and directed the company golem to start moving. Kira watched the delivery dwarf merge with the rest of the cart traffic while she limbered up. After several good stretches and a few hops in place, she dropped to all fours, butt and tail sticking up in the air. Recognizing her infamous take-off position, the crowd in front immediately parted as she darted off through the streets at top speeds. She dashed between people, over stalls and under carriages. This seemingly reckless sprint used to invite only angry yells and startled curses, yet now elicited cheers and greetings. Just how hard was it to start moving? Kira watched the delivery dwarf merge with the rest of the cart traffic while she limbered up. She limbered up. After several greetings. And a few hops in place, she dropped to all fours, butt and tail sticking up in the air. Recognizing her infamous take-offs, yet now elicited cheers and greetings.
Okay, bring this over here.
Pedestrians and peddlers alike seemed thrilled to see their resident hero return after a long absence. Kira was so famous among the locals she was practically Azure Vale's mascot. Her rush hour dash was equally well known. People didn't need to see her tail or ears to immediately tell it was her charging through traffic and swinging around lampposts and tree signs. They nevertheless got a good look at her defining feline features since her hood had slipped off when she initiated the quadruped sprint. Purely by accident, of course.
Welcome back, Miss Morgana!
Shouted a kebab vendor.
Yay! Kira's back!
Called out a boy playing in the snow.
Watch the ice, kiddo! Watch the ice, kiddo!
yelled a beefy-looking adventurer as he passed by.
Never thought I'd miss someone vaulting over my fence until now,
grumbled an innkeeper. The random cheers and greetings she received steadily became more familiar and casual as she approached the house of one Rowana Slythe. This was the Catgirl's home neighborhood, so it was only natural she'd be especially popular around here. Kira excitedly looked up at the tree towards her house and, as such, failed to notice a freshly frozen puddle on the ground. Her hand slipped on it, making her fall on... Her hand slipped on it, making her fall on and slipped Her hand slipped on it, making her fall on and flip over her shoulder before crashing magnificently into a nearby wall, leaving her upside down with her feet and tail in the air. The impact also shook some loose snow from the tiled roof. Which plopped straight onto her face as if it had a grudge. After picking herself up and dusting off, the red-faced beastkin continued on her way at a brisk pace while onlookers held in their laughter. Seeing a young girl have an adorably clumsy yet ultimately harmless tumble was definitely a crowd-pleaser. Boxxy would indulge in such fan service on occasion, but this wasn't one of those. The slip and fall were a genuine accident. This was the shapeshifter's first taste of real winter as Kira, so it had underestimated the slipperiness of hard-packed snow that had turned to ice. It played it off well enough, but the monster groaned inwardly that it could really do without any more surprises for a while. Boxxy brushed the incident off and had its game face back on by the time it reached Rowana's home and stood in front of the door. In typical Kira fashion, the girl flung the door open with a light kick while loudly declaring her return.
Honey, I'm home!
It would appear Boxxy's earlier wish had failed to come true, as a surprise was waiting for it inside. The familiar, silver-haired elven beauty was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the single-room hovels I think some music here would be fine, actually. I'll just call it Welcome Home for now. Instead, the single-room hovel's only occupant was a strange, dark-haired beastkin boy. Instead, the single room's Instead, the single-room hovel's only occupant was a strange, dark-haired beastkin boy. The furry ears poking up from his scalp were distinctly canine, as was the bushy tail draped over his knees. He had been sitting at Roanna's desk poring over a thick tome of some sort when the cat girl barged in, and the two of them were now staring right into each other's eyes. Kira lunged at the stranger in the next instant, dropping the rucksack she was carrying while pulling out a mithril dagger from under her coat.
Whoa!
The boy let out a startled yelp at the sudden motion, but the mid-level ranger was too quick for him and tackled him off his chair before he could make a move. Kira pinned him to the floor and put her shiny knife to his throat, causing the poor lad to squeal in fear with tears welling up in his bright blue eyes. Thrilled dagger from under her each other's eyes. Kira lunged at the stranger in the next instant, dropping the rucksack she was carrying while pulling out. He had been sitting at. Kira lunged at the stranger in the next instant, dropping the rucksack she was carrying while pulling out a mithril dagger from under her. Pulled him off his chair before he could make a move. Kira pinned him to the floor and put her shiny knife to his throat, causing the poor lad to squeal in fear with tears welling up in his bright blue eyes.
Who are you?
She growled while looming over him.
Where's Rowie?
However, the intruder could only muster gasps and fragmented sounds, as he was unsure how to deal with this sudden outburst of violence. Some unseen force interpreted his awkward flailing and stammering as a form of resistance, which prompted a series of very informative notifications. However, the intruder could only muster gasps. Clash of Fate has been invoked. The hero of chaos will now face the hero of magic on the field of battle. None may interfere in this righteous contest. May destiny smile upon the victor. The two beastkin stared at each other in total silence as the revelation began to sink in. In the heat of the moment, Kira ended up pressing her dagger against the stranger's throat hard enough to draw blood. Boxxy wasn't sure what was going on, but the monster's kill-or-be-killed mentality had come to the forefront and was influencing the actions of its facade. Given how low this unknown hero's HP was, a single full-powered slash would be more than enough to decapitate him on the spot and net the power-hungry monster another God-given skill. Kira then felt a warm, damp sensation spreading over her leg. She glanced down to find that the stranger had wet himself out of fear. That pathetic reaction snapped the shapeshifter out of its murderous intent, allowing it to realize this was a horrible idea in the long run. Its public persona could not be caught killing other heroes in cold blood. And that Clash of Fate announcement, it would have been broadcast to everyone in the city. This was neither the time nor place. The catgirl rose to her feet, dragging the mumbling buffoon she was accosting up along with her, then slammed him face first against the wall while still holding him at knife point. Time nor place. The catgirl rose to her feet, dragging the mumbling buffoon she was accosting up along with her, then slammed him face first against the wall while still holding him at knife point.
I'm going to ask you only one more time. Where is Roanna? Roanna.
She's out shopping.
He managed to yell out.
Something about a special lunch. She insisted.
And what about you? What are you doing here?
I'm a guest! A guest! Honest. Look, my bag is over there. You'll find a letter from Lady Amaryl in it. She's one of my teachers and the one who invited me.
The cat girl let go of the boy and slowly moved for his bag while keeping her blade trained on him. She reached in and pulled out a fancy-looking parchment. She unrolled it with one hand and gave it a skim. It definitely bore Imriel's personal seal and was addressed to Nao Shoki. That strange name matched the one hovering over the stranger's head, visible only to the creature with Mortimer's borrowed skill.
Okay. Say I believe you.
Actually, let me change the ambience here.
She put down the document, blade still at the ready.
How do we undo this clash thing? I'm still new to hero stuff, so I have no idea.
Just lower your weapon and cease hostilities. It should go away if we give it some time.
Kira warily did as instructed, and the two beastkins stared at each other tensely for about a minute before the man's words were proven true. Clash of Fate has been rescinded. The hero of chaos has made peace with the hero of magic.
Oh, thank Lunar!
He exclaimed as he slumped down to the ground.
I guess I should apologize for that.
No, it's fine. You were only protecting your home against a suspicious individual. I can hardly blame you for being on edge, especially after what you went through.
What I went through? What's that supposed to mean?
She raised her blade once more.
Whoa!
Exclaimed the lad, throwing his hands up.
Look, I mean you no harm. I'm here to help, actually, after I came here at Lady Imriel's request. After I came here at Lady Imriel's request, I was told by a very kind paladin named Lictor that you'd have some... After I came here at Lady Imriel's request, I was told by a very kind paladin named Lictor that you've had some recent troubles.
Define troubles,
she snarled, murderous intent rising.
I swear I don't know much,
he answered quickly in a panic.
I was just told you were kidnapped and woke up with a weird thing in your back. I know a lot about stuff, so they asked me to take a look at it. I know a lot about stuff, so they asked me to take a look at it. Strictly confidential, of course.
Oh my God!
Exclaimed Kira, as what she had done finally sank in.
You're to help me, and You're here to help me, and I pulled a knife on you. Oh shit! I cut you! You're bleeding! Are you okay? You're here to help.
I'm fine. Just a scratch. Barely lost any HP.
The cat girl glanced around the house, specifically at the blood and urine stains on the floor.
Quick! We need to clean this up before...
Kira! Oh. Kira!
The sound of an angry Rowana came in through the still open door.
Damn it, Kira!
She shouted when she saw the mess.
I've been waiting for you to come back for an eternity, and when you finally show up, you try to assault our guest. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Honey, I'm home?
The cat girl smiled awkwardly.
What? That's not... You can't just... Why did...
The elf's shoulders dropped, followed by her giving off a long, tired sigh. Once she calmed down a bit, she walked over to her girlfriend and gave her a rather forceful hug.
Welcome back, sweetie.
She whispered softly. After a bit of cleaning up, a change of clothes, a good deal of apologizing. After a bit of cleaning up, a change of clothes, a good deal of apologizing, and a pleasant chat with some heavily armed guards that had arrived at the scene, the three of them finally managed to clear up all misunderstandings. They then sat around the dining table for a civil conversation over a nice cup of Rowanna's special blend of calming tea.
Again, I'm really sorry for what I did.
The cat girl. I don't need to do that.
I didn't see Rowie, and there was a stranger, and...
It's all right, Miss Morgana. Like I said, I completely understand, though I must say your timing was rather exquisite.
Apparently, even though he had been in town for a few days now, the hero of magic known as Now Shoki had only arrived at Rowanna's abode shortly before Kira did. After introducing himself to the mistress of the house and explaining his purpose, she invited him in. She then insisted she prepare a special meal to welcome him to Azure Vale, which was why she left him to watch the house while she left to procure ingredients. Long story short, if Kira had come back from her month-long trip just 15 minutes sooner or later, none of this would have happened.
Yeah. It's a Hero of Chaos thing.
The redhead groaned.
I always end up in freaky situations. It's kind of my thing.
Sounds troublesome.
Like you wouldn't believe.
Rowanna forced a smile.
You get used to it, though.
The cat girl shrugged.
Mostly.
I can only imagine. Did I do English earlier? Sounds troublesome.
Like...
I can only imagine. Nevertheless, I would appreciate if you refrained from grabbing me like that again,
pleaded the visitor.
I'm not very good at dealing with women, especially violent ones.
Is that why you freaked out like that?
He answered Kira with a sheepish nod.
Wow, okay. Don't take this the wrong way, but you don't look or act like a hero at all.
Upon closer inspection, Now's short and spiky hair was not uniform in color, but made up of both light and dark streaks of gray. The odd coloration was also present in his bushy tail and pointy ears. Combined with his unnaturally bright blue eyes, it gave off the impression of a mountain-dwelling timber wolf. Or at least it would have, if not for his incredibly youthful face, soft voice, and overall meek demeanor. He was more pup than predator. The rest of him was also quite non-threatening and distinctly unmanly. He was only a few centimeters taller than Kira, though he appeared shorter since he was constantly hunched over. He wore a dark blue robe with a bright yellow trim that wrapped snugly around his slim arms and torso, with a slit in the back to let his tail dangle freely. The clearly high-class garment's lower end obscured his legs aside from his leather sandals, which exposed his bare, clawed toes. He also had, for whatever reason, 3 whole belts hanging off his waist. Each was studded with a series of tiny precious stones, and all of them seemed quite useless from a practical standpoint.
get that a lot. You, on the other hand, are just as terrifying as I thought you would be.
Terrifying?
She exclaimed. She exclaimed while leaning forwards.
What's that supposed to mean? Supposed to mean. Kira, you're upsetting our guest.
Rowana said, her voice stern.
Sorry, Rowie, but he just called me terrifying. I'm not all that scary. I'm not all that scary, am I?
Forgive me, Miss Morgana, but I just heard a rather, colorful collection of nicknames on my way to Azure Vale. They may have influenced my, preconceptions.
Colorful? Like what?
Promise you won't get mad.
I promise.
Hammer Breaker, Hero Killer, the Mad Cat, the Blood-Soaked Jester, Herald of Armageddon, and those are the more, flattering ones.
Egads! Egads! My dear Kira is the kindest person I know. Who would dare spread such vile filth? The shitheads over in the Empire, I would imagine,
said the kind person with a scowl.
Bunch of sore losers can't cope with the fact their poster child got his ass handed to him by a girl.
Well, you can't put all the blame on propaganda,
muttered Now.
You were super intense when you, greeted me earlier.
Look, I've been through a lot, okay? Everyone gets twitchy when they're stressed out, and my trip was pretty damn stressful.
This statement rang far truer than the standard deluge of dishonesty that normally spilled out of Kira's mouth. Even if Boxxy enjoyed certain parts of its latest adventure and obtained significant profits and benefits, it had been a mentally and physically draining endeavor. The way it failed to seal the deal with Nora Cromwell was especially bothersome. Then there was the fact that it failed to capture any dungeon cores, though not for a lack of trying. The hearts of the places it visited were either inaccessible or outright missing because someone else had beaten it to the punch. Probably the spymaster's lackeys, if it had to hazard a guess. It therefore had to take the long way home, where the Foundation was no doubt waiting for it. After all that, the shapeshifter was looking forward to laying low and relaxing for the foreseeable future, at least until this soulstone business was resolved.
It's okay, sweetie,
Rowana reassured Kira with a smile.
A hot meal and a hotter bath will help you forget those troubles. Did you manage to find your friend? Sort of. Fizzy's busy doing Julian's work, so it'll be a while before she can come back. I would have honestly come back sooner, but... Oh, right! Rowie, I have some great news.
The Catgirl suddenly perked up, taking the elf's... The Catgirl suddenly perked up, taking the elf's hands. The Catgirl suddenly perked up, taking the elf's hands in her own.
What? What is it? The thing in my back. We don't need to worry about it. We just need to be patient and wait for it to go away on its own. Really? You're certain? Yes, 100,000,000% sure.
While an exaggeration, the monster had definitely confirmed Reggie's intel on the matter while it dismantled the Order of the Black Wand.
Oh, thank the gods!
The two shared another long hug as a few tears of happiness fell out of Rowana's emerald green eyes and rolled down her pink cheeks. The two shared another long hug as a few tears of happiness fell out of Rowana's emerald green eyes and rolled down her pink cheeks. She tried to be strong for her girlfriend's sake, but it was only natural she'd worry about her lover when she suddenly came home with a tumorous jewel in her back.
Sorry to interrupt your moment, butted in now. But do you mind if I take a look at that anyway? It's the main reason I'm here. The two lovebirds broke up their embrace, and Kira gave Rowana an apprehensive look.
It's fine, isn't it? It's fine, isn't it? Who best to make absolutely sure you'll be fine than your fellow hero? No offense, Rowie, but the last fellow hero I met tried to kill me. Come now, don't be like that. This sweet boy wouldn't hurt a fly.
I am not a boy! Shouted now in his first show of genuine anger. I'm 25 years old! Oh, man. I don't know. I might keep it just myself, but the only other person I'm thinking is, I'm thinking either JTJ or Gary. JTJ hasn't done much besides Reggie, and Reggie's a pretty important character. I haven't decided yet. He realized what he said and shrank back into his seat with a red face. Sorry, I really hate being called boy, or darling, or cutie, or brat, or anything of the like. It's hard enough to get people to take me seriously as it is. It was a bit ironic, as those were exactly the sort of words one would use to describe the man. The complete and total absence of facial hair was especially damning, though his biggest problem was, without a doubt, his personality. The shy but cute bookworm thing probably invited all manner of teasing, perhaps even bullying.
I'll keep that in mind. Are you sure you'll be fine, though? I don't mind taking off my clothes for an examination, but you said you had a fear of women, didn't you? Something like that, but I'll be fine with you, Miss Morgana. You're more like a monster than a woman anyway.
He said, with a slight smile. Oh no, that's her. The cat girl splayed herself out across the table with a dry, humorless laugh.
That's right. I'm just a herald of Armageddon, after all,
she mumbled in a dull monotone, her eyes unfocused.
Just a bad omen that destroys lives with its very presence, turning everything it touches to ash and cinders. The world would be better off if I crawled into a hole and disappeared forever. Now,
Rowana squealed.
You shouldn't say such things. Do you have any idea how much Kira struggles with self-doubt every single day?
I'm sorry. It was a bad joke. I didn't mean it. After a bit more hamming it up under the pretense of too much has been going on recently, Kira finally took off her coat and shirt, showing her back to the hero of magic. The Crimson Soulstone had already shrunk to a fraction of its original size and was currently no bigger than a palm print. Now reached for his bag and started pulling out a number of magic tools, including a pair of enchanted rimless spectacles, a mithril needle, and a magical magnifying glass. He began inspecting the Soulstone, careful not to chip or scratch it with his various instruments. Boxxy was keeping a close eye on his movements, ensuring he didn't do anything weird that might endanger the Soulstone's integrity. Its life was still tethered to this thing, so it needed to protect it at all costs. It couldn't help but be on edge, even though there didn't seem to be anything particularly dangerous in his bag. On the upside, this was an opportunity to see if the hero of magic was indeed as smart as his title implied, so there was something to be gained by humoring him. Thankfully, Boxxy's vigilance proved unnecessary, as the youthful wolfkin concluded his examination after only a few minutes.
Well, the bad news is I can't say I know exactly what this is, he said calmly, but I can tell an alchemically created stone when I see one. The good news is that Miss Morgana...
Please, call me Kira.
All right. The good news is that Kira's information was correct. Whatever this thing is, it's mostly inert by now. It should be absorbed into her body and then, expelled from it without further complications.
Wait, expelled? What's that supposed to mean?
Boxxy asked out of genuine concern, as neither Reggie nor the intelligence from the Order mentioned anything about that part.
Oh, well, it's when you,
He means poop, sweetie.
Rowana bluntly stated.
Yeah, that.
Oh, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
That was a bit of a problem, as doppelgangers did not, in fact, poop. Not usually, anyway. They could produce excrement. They just didn't need to. Their bodies, much like those of mimics, were capable of completely breaking down anything they put into their mouths if given enough time. Bone, meat, fruit, leather, glass, pebbles, wood. Pretty much everything, aside from metal and large stones, was fair game. Should something truly indigestible find itself into their system, it would just be, for lack of a better word, spat out. Boxxy therefore decided to do like the city of Erosa and scheduled a forceful evacuation of its own.
You can put your shirt back on, Miss Kira. The cat girl mumbled
Thanks.
as she quickly got dressed.
I just feel so bad about this.
She winced at now.
It's like you came all this way and nearly got stabbed for nothing.
Yes, well, Azure Vale is indeed a long way from the Pearly Dunes, but I wouldn't say the trip wasn't worthwhile. I got to experience real snow, for one thing. Though, if I can be honest with you, I did have a secondary motive in coming here. You see, I heard tales of a warlock that could command a demonic overlord. One that you're supposedly quite close to, Kira.
When Now heard the nickname Herald of Armageddon, he naturally followed up by asking what such an ominous moniker could mean. That was how he found out about the events of Armageddon Day, which practically ended the Cataclysm conflict between the Lodrak Empire and Ishigar Republic. Teresa's chosen, taken down by a newly revealed hero, was big news, so it was only natural it would spread to the continent's far corners. What Lunar's studious disciple wanted to know, however, was what exactly happened before that encounter.
I see.
The redhead squinted suspiciously.
You want to meet Mr. S, do you?
If you're referring to this Sandman character, then yes, I would like to trade words with him.
Well, sorry to disappoint, but I can't make that happen. He gets in contact with me, not the other way around. Besides, he's not exactly the, sharing type. I haven't even seen his face, so I doubt he'd be revealing his trade secrets to some random guy. No offense.
Oh, that's a shame. I was hoping to borrow his insight regarding demonic beings for a project I'm working on.
Project? What project?
In all honesty, it's not something that I expect would yield anything of value. In all honesty, it's not something that I expect would yield anything of value. Now admitted while scratching his cheek. It's just that every now and then you hear tales of people being turned into demons, or vice versa. It's extremely unlikely those stories are anything more than outlandish myths and legends, but I wish to separate the fiction from the facts. Assuming there are any to be found, of course.
Why would you even look into something shady like that? Why would you even look into something shady like that?
I just want to know, that's all, he said, with a pure smile. It is my mission in life to seek out and unearth the truth behind all those old tales, to unlock the secrets of magic lost to time. The goddess of magic and learning saw I had the potential to learn and comprehend a great deal, so she chose to support my goals. Whether I will actually put my discoveries to use, well, I'll leave that for my order. Whether I will actually put my discoveries to use, well, I'll leave that for my older, wiser self to decide.
Huh. You're not as reckless as I thought.
Kira leaned back in her seat.
I was so sure the hero of magic would be looking for the ultimate way to flatten mountains or something.
Same here, agreed Roanna with a nod. What? Why would you ever think that?
You are Immaril's student, right?
Pointed out the cat girl. Yeah, don't need that.
Yeah. Yeah, the one that zapped an entire flock of birds out of the sky because they pooped on her?
I'm her student as an enchanter, he protested. Don't need that either. Enchanter! I want to ward off disease, avert disaster, and prolong lifespans. My work aims to make life better, not end it faster.
Those aren't so different. The world isn't the kind of nice and fuzzy place that would spare someone just because they have a warm bed. We live with monsters that cannot be reasoned with and will not stop their destructive ways unless someone puts them down. If getting rid of them before they cause tragedy isn't making lives better, then what is?
Look, I'm not an idiot. I will not belittle the adventurers and soldiers that keep people Look, I'm not an idiot. I will not belittle the adventurers and soldiers that keep people like me safe. I'm not going to argue that magic is a weapon. The thing is, so are swords, axes, catapults, and bows. We live in an age where the average level of both adventurers and their armaments are higher than they've ever been. However, the mystic arts can do so much more than slaughter beasts in some dank cave.
Like making entire cities disappear in a puff of flame and smoke? You're right. There's no way I'd be able to do that with just a bow and arrow.
That's not what I mean! If harnessed and used right, the energy we call mana has the potential to uplift our civilization. Yet, we're too busy flinging it at people's faces to fully explore that possibility. Any idiot can blow up a mountain, but how many can piece it back together?
Don't you dare talk to me about putting things back together. I've seen things. I know what becomes of those who act for the good of the people. The only thing your idiotic ambitions will accomplish is give some monster the means to harm others.
Oh, yes, I'm sure a troll will be able to do all sorts of damage with a bracelet that can, say, halt the advance of the otherwise incurable paralyzing rotflesh disease.
No, you misunderstand. The monsters I'm referring to don't live in the woods and bash things with clubs. I'm talking about the vile creatures that pat each other on the back as they send fathers, sons, and brothers to die so they can redraw some lines on a map. The kind that will take your noble intentions, twist them into a knot, and then shove them so far up your... That's enough! Both of you, calm down!
let's see here. Go ahead and give Annie a second. Track.
That's enough! Shove them so far up your— That's enough! Both—
butted in Rowana, her tone stricter than ever.
Kira, sweetie, you're tired, and my sensitive nose does not appreciate the faint smell of urine on you. Our guest has had a rather eventful day himself. So, let's avoid getting political so we can all get some rest, and we can get you into a nice hot bath. Right. I'm sorry again now. Certain topics just agitate me.
So I've noticed. Then, if you'll excuse me. Just as the still upset Wolfkin was getting up to leave, Boxxy had a flash of brilliance.
Wait, hold on. You said you wanted to unlock the secrets behind old, strange magic, right?
The Wolfkin stopped in his tracks and silently regarded her with a raised eyebrow for a few moments. Yes?
I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I think I have something you would want to look at.
All right, but no promises. She stood up and walked over to the rucksack she brought with her. She reached in and, after discreetly accessing storage, pulled out a certain pink square of a gem. She walked back to Now and held it up for him to see. His curiosity piqued, he glanced at it from a few angles before holding out his hand. The redhead obliged the silent request and dropped the precious stone in his palm. Very interesting indeed. Can't say I've ever seen a gem quite like this.
What is it? That's what I want to know. It's something that was entrusted to me, but I have no idea what it is, where it came from, or what it does, or even why it was given to me in the first place.
I suppose it's certainly mysterious, isn't it? Might as well take a look-see. Excuse me for a moment. Now cupped his hands together, pressing the item between his palms. Identify. Appraise item. Detect enchant. Boxxy reclassified now Shoki inside its mind, increasing his threat level from probably harmless to potentially catastrophic. He had just used a trio of scribe skills, which implied he was capable of viewing Kira's status. That could not be allowed under any circumstances. The essence concealment skill common among heroes was ineffective against divine eyes. While it was unclear whether being chosen by the gods classified Now's peepers as such, it was probably a safe bet to assume he'd see Boxxy's real status if he ever appraised the monster. The wolf boy-like man remained ignorant to the brewing danger just in front of him as he looked over the jewel in his hands. How strange. I'm not getting anything. It's so utterly devoid of magic, it's like I'm trying to appraise a random rock.
Yeah, everybody else said the same. Except Mr. S. He said it seemed to soak up mana or something.
An absorption property, eh? Something like that could potentially interfere with an item's analysis, but the absorption rate would need to be ridiculous. Considering it took an estimated 50,000 MP to fully charge this thing, ridiculous was definitely an apt way to describe it. Do you mind if I borrow this for a few days so I can study it? I'm afraid I don't have the proper equipment on hand.
Well, okay. Just make sure to bring it back safely when you're done. It's the only memento I have left of my teacher, and I'm only entrusting it to you because you're a hero. If you think I was violent before, you wouldn't want to see what I'd do if something happens to that. So don't do anything that both of us would regret.
The threat may have simply been lip service, but the underlying message of, "It's your funeral if you don't give it back," was loud and clear. I shall make extra sure to treat it with utmost care then." That was a satisfactory response. Boxxy wanted to avoid an actual clash of fate, if at all possible, since that would, in all likelihood, make Kira's reputation take a nosedive. The time with Bernard was fine, since they were on opposing sides during a war, but society normally looked down upon hero killers, repeat offenders especially. However, if it was for the sake of that exquisite shiny, the negative publicity would probably be worth it. With that in mind, it decided to have Claws track the guy just to make sure nothing weird happened.
Wait, is that the thing Fayhorn left for you?
asked Roanna while squinting at the shiny thing.
Looks a lot pinker from what I remember.
Ah, crap. Boxxy had forgotten that it lied to the elf about that inherited item and showed her a plain ruby in its stead. It did that to avoid any unwelcome reactions, since the relationship between them was still somewhat fresh. Things were different now, giving the shapeshifter an easy out. There were several ways to smooth things over when one partner had caught the other in a barefaced lie, but one was clearly the best option in the long term.
Yeah, I might have shown you a different one back then.
Which was to admit to it, then beg for forgiveness.
You what? Why? Didn't you tell me there'd be no more secrets? I forgot, okay? Back then I didn't want to upset you by bringing in suspicious magical gems that may or may not blow up. That thing can explode? I said it might. I don't know. And you had that in the house. This is exactly why I lied about it. It's probably fine, but I knew you'd raise a fuss. We'll talk about this later, in private.
Roanna was about to unleash a torrent of loud, full-hearted bitching, but stopped when she remembered they still had a guest. The person in question was barely containing a chuckle as he watched them quarrel. His reaction seemed innocent enough, but something about his attitude ticked off the elf even further.
What? Does our relationship amuse you?
She said in a thoroughly unamused tone.
No, sorry. I didn't mean anything by it. I just thought you two seemed like an old married couple for a second.
Now didn't know it yet, but he had stepped on a landmine. Hearing the M word did little to abate Roanna's bad mood. Just the opposite, in fact. Frankly speaking, she'd had enough of her own mother harping on about it without some random furball butting his head in. To be more precise, it was the fact that she couldn't get married to her lover that really ticked her off. She knew she shouldn't be taking it out on a hero, especially one who came here to help them, so she did her best not to fly off the handle at him.
I think you should leave now,
Kira whispered, while Roanna visibly seethed.
Yes, ma'am.
Realizing he had overstayed his welcome, now immediately turned to leave. As he was walking out the front door, however, there was a rather violent gust of wind that knocked him over, making him drop the gem in his hands and turned to leave. As he was walking out the front
Honey,
Realizing he had overstayed his welcome, now immediately turned to leave. As he was walking out, wind that knocked him over, making him drop the gem in his hands. There was a rather... As he was walking out the front door, however, there was a rather violent gust of wind that knocked him over, making him drop the gem in his hand as he fell backwards. It drew a wonderful arc through the air, landing softly on Kira's crimson hair. As he was walking out the front door, however, there was a rather violent gust of wind that knocked him over. Violent gust of wind that knocked him over, making him drop the gem. Making him drop the gem. Making him drop the gem in his hand as he fell backwards. It drew a wonderful arc through the air, landing softly on Kira's crimson hair.
Terribly sorry about that,
He said as he picked himself up.
I'll just, put that in my bag for safekeeping.
With the item once more securely in his possession, he finally left the house. Rowana and Kira glared at each other for a few moments, but neither was keen to resume the argument. Not yet, anyway. The elf went downstairs to draw a bath while the redhead finished off her tea. Once her cup was empty, she went over to the bed and began undressing while the muffled sound of running water came up through the floorboards. Boxxy wondered, was this place always this quiet? It then realized something was missing from this humble abode. Something small, hyperactive, incredibly lucky, and enviably square-shaped. Rowana and Kira glared at each other for a few moments, but neither was keen to resume the argument. Not yet, anyway. The elf went downstairs to draw...
Rowie?
Kira shouted.
Where's Minnick? Damn. Damn! I forgot to feed it this morning.
The elf yelled from the cellar.
Must have gone out to find lunch. Now it'll come back all filthy and covered in sewage again.
On cue, the house mimic burst through the tiny flap in the front door. It ran up to Kira's feet and bounced around excitedly while rapidly yipping. The cat girl bent over, picked it up, and put it on her bare lap. She smiled sweetly, then proceeded to stroke its smooth surface, especially the bright red gem that stood in the middle of its lid. Boxxy wasn't surprised to see its older yet smaller sibling was alive and well, though it was glad to see the little guy again. Rowana walked up from the basement at that point, feeling her heart melt a bit at the sweet scene. On cue, the house mimic burst through the tiny flap in the front. On cue, the house mimic burst through the tiny flap in the front door. It ran up to Kira's feet and bounced around excitedly while rapidly yipping. The cat girl bent over. A bit at the sweet scene.
Come on, love. Water's ready. Come on, love. Water's ready,
She called out after a few moments.
I can take Minnick with me, right? I don't know, it might get in the way with both of us in there. You're coming in with me? Why wouldn't I?
The elf crossed her arms.
Aren't you still mad about the gem thing? Quite a bit, yes. And you're going to make it up to me by washing my back, cuddling up with me, then doing that thing you do with your tongue until I'm satisfied. Well, when you put it like that, perhaps I should get you mad more often. Hack.
Hack!
Kira's attempt at flirting was rudely interrupted when Minnick started coughing and heaving. It managed to dislodge a foreign object from its throat a few minutes later and spat it out into the cat girl's cleavage. She reflexively grasped the choking hazard, and both her and Rowana were surprised to find it was a certain square-cut pink gem.
Kira? Is that what I think it is? Uh-huh. But how did... Wait for it. How did... Wait for it.
Bam, bam, bam!
Excuse me in there. It's urgent.
There was a panicked banging at the door, followed by Now's voice. The girls traded some curious glances before Rowana trotted over and poked her head through the entrance.
Yes, what is it now?
I'm terribly sorry about this, but I lost the heirloom Miss Morgana gave me. I'm terribly sorry about this, but I lost the heirloom Miss Morgana gave me.
The cellar.
Must have gone out to find lunch. Now it'll come back all filthy and covered in sewage again.
On cue, the house mimic burst through the tiny flap in the front door. It ran up to Kira's feet and bounced around excited. On cue. He explained, his words firing off faster than a lightning elemental.
I know you just gave it to me 5 minutes ago, but it fell out of my bag when I slipped on some ice. A weird box creature snatched it off the ground before I could pick it up and disappeared into a snowbank. Again, I'm really sorry, but I need Miss Morgana and her ranger skills to help me track it down.
The elf looked back at her lover, and the two shared a quick laugh. Lover, and the two shared. Lover, and the two shared a. The cat girl quickly redressed that. The cat girl quickly redressed, then the two introduced Minnick to now and explained not to worry, though the animate box seemed to dislike the wolfkin for some reason. Rowana returned the item back to the flabbergasted scholar while he apologized a dozen times over. Now, then, somewhat reluctantly placed the bizarre stone in his item box, a lesser version of Boxxy's storage skill. Now, then, somewhat reluctantly placed the bizarre stone in his item box, a lesser version of Boxxy's storage skill. He didn't want to do this initially because, in his own words, you never know when these mystery trinkets will react badly to spatial magic, but after a solid amount of urging from Kira, he finally agreed and went on his way. Once the bumbling hero was gone for good, the two women were finally able to share a romantic... Once the bumbling hero was gone for good, the two women were finally able to share a romantic, extremely passionate bath. They spent the rest of the afternoon indoors as Boxxy regaled its doppelganger XP source with stories of made-up of... Damn it. They spent the rest of the afternoon indoors as Boxxy regaled its doppelganger XP source with stories of made-up adventure while they snuggled on the bed with Minnick. They then went out for a brief walk, had a nice dinner, and followed up with another round of makeup sex before falling asleep in each other's arms. Boxxy had already slept soundly prior to organizing Kira's official return to Azure Vale, but it still felt drained from all the needles. Boxxy had already slept soundly prior to organizing Kira's official return to Azure Vale, but it still felt drained from all the needless effort it put into Mortimer's quest. Boxxy had already slept soundly prior to organizing Kira's official return to Azure Vale, but it still felt drained from all the needless effort it put into Mortimer's quest. Using enormous amounts of magic was quite taxing on the body, and the hundreds of transfamiliar hops were no exception. Admittedly, sharing a bed with a piece of convenient meat and a purring mini-box wasn't its ideal sleeping arrangement, but it still found itself dozing off in the familiar atmosphere. When it woke up the next morning, it found something waiting for it on top of the old nightstand on its side of the bed. It was an impossibly familiar pink gem that betrayed not even a hint as to how it got there.
There we go. All right, that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for coming to hang out while I narrated that. I will be back into the cold reads tomorrow at 10 a.m. or trying at 10 a.m. I made it through a lot more today than I planned on because that was the longest chapter in the world, but that's all right. I'm fine with that. We'll do another 5 to 8% tomorrow. So yeah, watch out for notifications for when I establish it. Do remember to go to soundbooththeater.com and check out some of our free stuff. Mega Mech Apocalypse Episode 3 Crossverse just came out today. It's narrated by Dory Sachs, who is the narrator of Scaft. She's working on Scaft right now as well. So go check that out and get used to using the platform because Scaft is going to be exclusive to our platform when we release it. And it'll be cheaper than buying it on Audible, even though it's going to be probably a 16-17 hour audiobook. It's still going to be like, I think we're going to probably price it at $10. So thanks so much one more time for coming. Go check out everything that we have available on soundbooththeater.com. Get used to using that platform, and hopefully I'll see you again tomorrow. Oh, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like the video. Later, guys.